Yo, what's up everyone? It's Eclipse Wizardry, and today we're checking out, what if Gabrielle and Fleur both awakened Veela soul brands on Harry age 6 in front of magical Britain. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The boy nobody watched. The stadium smelled like fried dough and excitement and the kind of sweat that comes from people packed too close together on a warm August afternoon. Banners snapped in the wind above the upper terraces, green and gold for the Kenmare Kestrels, blue and silver for the Montrose Magpies, and somewhere up in the premium boxes, someone had set off a fanfare charm that kept playing the same 4 notes over and over until a woman with an enormous hat told it sharply to stop. Vernon Dudley had not wanted to come. He'd made that clear 17 times on the drive up, and 8 more times while they queued at the muggle-blind entrance behind a family of redheads so numerous that Dudley had asked, quite loudly, if they were a school trip. Petunia had shushed him. The red-headed father had smiled at them all with the universal patience of a man who had stopped being embarrassed by his children sometime around 1987. Harry walked 3 steps behind. Not because anyone told him to. He'd just learned, over 6 years of being the wrong size in every room, that it was easier. 3 steps back meant you didn't bump into Dudley when he stopped suddenly to point at something. 3 steps back meant you could watch where everyone was going without being watched yourself. 3 steps back was the right distance between existing and being noticed. He was wearing Dudley's old trainers, which were 2 sizes too big and had a hole in the left sole that let the wet grass in. His jeans were held up with a piece of twine because the belt had broken last spring and nobody had replaced it. The t-shirt was large enough to function as a short dress. He didn't think about any of this. It was just how clothes were. The corridor beneath the main stands was chaos in the best possible way, vendors shouting, children running, the smell of butterbeer and something sweet being charmed into shapes that moved. Harry watched a small sugar phoenix beating its wings on a stick, rising and falling in a slow, hypnotic loop, while its owner, a girl about his age with bright red pigtails, laughed every time it dipped toward her nose. "Keep up, boy," Vernon said, without looking back. Harry kept up. He tucked himself into the wake of the Dursley family's considerable mass and moved through the crowd like water finding the path of least resistance. Above him, through gaps in the stone ceiling, he could hear the roar of an early practice session, brooms cutting the air, the hollow crack of a bludger being redirected, a whistle sharp enough to slice through everything else. He wanted, more than almost anything, to watch. He wouldn't ask. The corridor forked. To the left, signs pointed toward the general seating for rows K through P, where the Dursleys' complimentary tickets, obtained through Vernon's firm doing business with someone who turned out to be a wizard, which had produced 3 days of absolute domestic turmoil, placed them. To the right, the corridor opened into a wider hall where the better-seated families were being directed toward the premium areas. Vernon went left without breaking stride. Dudley waddled after him. Petunia followed, her handbag clutched to her chest as though the magical objects around her might leap out and contaminate it. Harry paused. Just for a second. Just because some pull he couldn't name, like the moment before a storm when the air pressure changes and your ears pop, made him look right instead of left. The wider hall was full of people who moved differently. Not more expensively, exactly, but with a kind of ease that came from never having had to apologize for taking up space. There were families he didn't recognize, officials in ministry robes, and, standing near the far entrance in a group of 4, speaking rapid French that he couldn't follow but found oddly pleasant, a family unlike anything he'd ever seen. The mother was tall and silver-haired, with cheekbones that looked architectural and the kind of grace that made the crowd part slightly around her without her noticing. The father was a large, pleasant-faced man in well-cut robes who was holding the hand of a small girl, the smallest of the group, who was, against all the noise and motion of the corridor, completely still. The older girl, the one who must have been maybe 10 or 11, had silver blonde hair that she wore in a loose plait and was currently arguing with her father about something with the passionate, gesturing energy of someone who has been wronged and wants it on the record. She had the same cheekbones as her mother and the kind of face that, even at that age, made people look twice and then look away quickly, embarrassed to have looked. None of them noticed Harry. And then the small one, the little girl holding her father's hand, turned her head. She was 4 years old, maybe. Small even for that. She had silver hair cut in a soft, messy bob that kept falling into her eyes, and the widest, most serious pair of gray eyes Harry had ever seen on a human being. She was wearing a pale blue dress and white shoes that were muddy at the toes, and she was looking directly at him with the unnerving intensity of a child who has not yet learned to pretend she isn't staring. Harry stared back. He didn't know why. He'd been stared at before, mostly by people looking at his scar, and he'd learned the trick of going slightly blank, of letting his face become a wall. But this was different. This girl wasn't looking at his scar. She was looking at him, with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between recognition and certainty, like a person who has finally found the thing they'd been looking for without knowing they were looking. Then her older sister glanced over mid-argument. The argument stopped. The corridor kept moving around them, vendors shouting, children running, the roar of practice overhead, but in the space between Harry and the two Delacour sisters, something went absolutely, completely quiet. Fleur Delacour was 11 years old and had been experiencing her Veela nature in small, manageable increments since she was 7, the warmth in her chest when she was happy, the way the air shimmered slightly around her when she was angry, the odd effect she had on people that her mother had sat her down and explained carefully and honestly when she was old enough to ask why boys her age acted like their brains had been temporarily removed. She knew what she was. She was proud of it, mostly, and frustrated by it sometimes, and she was absolutely certain that she was not going to be one of those Veela who couldn't control herself. She saw the small, dark-haired boy in the oversized clothes standing at the fork in the corridor, and something in her chest cracked open like an egg. It wasn't romantic. She was 11 and he was clearly no older than 6, and that was not what this was. It wasn't attraction. It was something far older and far less negotiable than attraction. It was the kind of recognition that happens in the bones before the brain catches up, the kind of knowing that her grandmother had described once, in a low voice, over wine that Fleur wasn't supposed to be drinking, as the moment when the fire decides. Fleur? Her father's voice, from somewhere very far away. The warmth in her chest became heat. The heat became something she didn't have a word for. The air around her shifted, not the little shimmer of a bad mood but something enormous and luminous, like a door opening onto a room full of sunlight. The corridor noticed. People stepped back. The vendor nearest to her dropped his tray of sugar phoenixes and they all took flight at once, a scattered flock of amber and gold rising toward the stone ceiling. Gabrielle let go of her father's hand. She walked toward Harry with the absolute calm of someone following a path they have always known was there. The crowd parted for her without drama, simply because she moved like she expected it to. She stopped in front of Harry and looked up at him and said, in French that Harry couldn't understand, something that her mother would later translate as, "There you are. I've been waiting." Harry looked down at her. Something in his chest felt strange, warm, like standing near a fire, but without the burning. He'd never felt anything like it. He said, because it was the only thing his 6-year-old brain could produce, "Hello." Gabrielle smiled. It was a small, satisfied smile, the smile of someone who has been proven right. Then the fire came. Not literally. But almost. The brand ignited, both of them, simultaneously, Fleur across the corridor and Gabrielle standing 3 feet from Harry, and the light that came off it was real and visible and absolutely impossible to miss. It came from the center of the chest, golden white and fierce, and it moved outward like a pulse, like a heartbeat made visible, and it washed through the entire corridor in a wave that knocked several people off their feet and stopped everyone else dead in their tracks. Every single person in that corridor felt it. Not the bond itself, that was between Harry and the sisters, but the echo of it, the resonance that a dual Veela soul brand produces when it ignites in the presence of witnesses, which the old texts describe as being similar to standing near a lightning strike. you're not the one hit, but you'll feel it in your teeth for a week." The corridor was silent. Then everyone started shouting at once. Harry, for his part, looked down at his chest, at the faint, warm, golden mark that was fading from visible light into something he could feel rather than see, settled just below his sternum like an ember that wasn't burning him, and thought, with the straightforward pragmatism of a child who has learned to observe first and panic later, "That's new." "Gabrielle." Apollon Delacour's voice cut through the shouting like a knife. She crossed the corridor in 5 strides, silver hair loose now from whatever charm had been holding it, her eyes bright with something between terror and awe. She dropped to her knees in front of her daughter, hands cupping that small face, and said something rapid and urgent in French. Gabrielle answered calmly, pointing at Harry. Apollon looked up. At Harry. At the fading light. At her daughter's expression, that same small, satisfied certainty. Then she looked over her shoulder at Fleur, who was standing very still in the middle of the corridor with the look of someone who has just been hit by a realization the size of a building. The shimmer around Fleur was enormous now, filling the space around her with warm light, and her hand was pressed flat against her own sternum with her fingers spread wide, like she was trying to hold something in. Fleur. Apollon's voice had changed. It was very quiet now. "Come here." Fleur came. She walked across the corridor as though walking through deep water, her eyes never leaving Harry, and when she reached her mother's side she crouched down without being asked so that her face was level with Harry's and looked at him with an expression that Harry didn't have the vocabulary for, desperate and fierce and something like grief, though he didn't know what she could possibly be grieving. "What is your name?" she asked, in English that carried a French accent as thick as good cream. "Harry," he said. "Harry," she repeated, and the way she said it, like it mattered, like his name was a real thing with real weight, made his throat tighten in a way he didn't understand. "Are you all right? Does anything hurt?" He thought about it honestly. "No," he said. It felt warm. Like when the sun comes out. Fleur made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite a sob. She pressed her hand harder against her chest. "Maman," she said, without looking away from Harry. "C'est le Fujimo." The silence that followed was of a different quality than the stunned silence after the brand. This was the silence of people who knew exactly what those words meant and could not quite believe they were hearing them in a corridor beneath a Quidditch stadium in front of 100 witnesses. Apollon Delacour sat back on her heels and looked at her 2 daughters and at the small, scruffy, entirely calm boy between them, and for a moment her composure, that extraordinary, effortless Veela composure, fractured completely. Her eyes filled with tears she didn't let fall. "Mon Dieu," she whispered. "My God." The crowd was pressing in now, the initial shock giving way to the human instinct to see, to document, to understand. Harry could hear voices. "Did you see that? What was that? Is she a full Veela? I've never seen anything like," and the sound of someone further back yelling for officials. He could also, if he turned his head, see the Dursleys, who had apparently realized he wasn't behind them and had come back to find him standing at the center of something that had made 100 magical people go white in the face. Vernon looked like a man who had bitten into an apple and found a wasp. "Boy." His voice carried over the crowd noise with the particular carrying power of a man who has spent 20 years not being told no. "What in the hell do you think you're?" Apollon stood up. She did it smoothly, in one motion, and the effect was immediate and absolute. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't use magic. She simply turned to face Vernon Dursley with the full weight of a Veela matriarch who has just watched her children bond with a neglected child and said, in English as precise as a scalpel, "You will lower your voice when speaking near my daughters." Vernon's mouth closed. It was, by any measure, a remarkable achievement. "This child," Apollon said, and the way she said "this child" made several people in the crowd flinch, "is with us now. He is absolutely not with you. He's our," Petunia started, voice thin and high. "Your nephew." Apollon turned to look at Petunia, and the warmth in her gaze was gone. "Yes. I can see that. The way she said "I can see that" made Petunia go very still. Harry was not watching the adults argue. He was watching Gabrielle, who had gone back to holding her father's hand but was watching him back with that same quiet certainty. He looked down again at where the brand had been visible on his chest. He couldn't see it now, it was under the too big shirt, but he could feel it, warm and steady, like a second heartbeat. He'd had strange things happen to him before. His hair grew back overnight when Petunia cut it. He'd ended up on the school roof once. A snake at the zoo had nodded at him like they'd met before. This was different. All those things had happened to him. This felt like something happening for him, though he couldn't have said why or how, and he was 6, so the philosophical nuance wasn't quite within his reach. What he knew was simpler than philosophy. He knew that the tall silver-haired woman had looked at him like he mattered. He knew that Fleur was still watching him like he might disappear if she looked away. He knew that the little girl in the muddy white shoes had said she'd been waiting for him, and that it had felt true. He turned to the woman, Apollon, and asked, with the careful politeness of a child who has been punished for asking wrong questions, "What happened to me?" Apollon looked at him for a moment that stretched. Then she crouched down to his level, smoothing her robes, and looked him in the face with those silver-gray eyes. "You have been claimed by my daughters," she said, choosing her words with visible care. "Both of them. At the same time." She paused. "This is called the Fujimo. The twin fire. It has not happened in a very long time. What it means," she stopped again. "What it means is that you are very important. To us. To our family. Do you understand?" Harry thought about it. "I'm important?" "Yes." He turned this over. It sat oddly, like wearing shoes on the right feet for the first time after wearing them the wrong way for so long you'd forgotten there was a difference. "Okay," he said. Fleur made that sound again, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob, and pressed her fingers to her mouth. From somewhere further down the corridor came the sounds of people in official robes pushing through the crowd, wands out, voices raised. Ministry officials, by the look of the badges. Behind them, moving with the unhurried certainty of a man who always arrives exactly when he intends to, came a tall figure in purple robes with half-moon spectacles and a beard that tucked into his belt. Albus Dumbledore had been in the stadium for an hour, in the ministry box, doing the quiet diplomatic work that kept the peace between 17 competing interests and 2 national teams and a press corps that sharpened its quills on the way in. He had a glass of butterbeer in his hand that he had not touched, and when the pulse of the dual brand had washed through the stadium, he had set it down very carefully and excused himself. He was not running. But he was moving quickly. "Ah," he said, when he reached the corridor entrance and saw Harry, and the Delacours, and the clearing the crowd had made around them. His voice was warm and measured and revealed nothing. "My. This is," he paused, looking at Apollon with an expression that was hard to read. "Madame Delacour. Monsieur Dumbledore." Apollon's voice was ice under silk. "I think," Dumbledore said, surveying the corridor with the air of a man cataloguing a situation he intends to manage, "that we should find somewhere quiet to discuss this." "I think," Apollon replied, "that the time for quiet discussions about this child has been too long delayed." Dumbledore looked at Harry. Harry looked back at him, this tall, odd, silver-bearded man he'd never seen before, with the frank curiosity of a child who hasn't been told to be intimidated yet. "Hello," Harry said. "Hello, my dear boy." Dumbledore's voice was very gentle. "I imagine this has been quite a morning for you." "There were sugar phoenixes," Harry told him. "They all flew away." "Indeed they did." Something moved behind Dumbledore's eyes, something complicated that he put away before Harry could identify it. "They'll come back." He said it lightly, like a charm. Like something he'd been telling himself for years. Behind Harry, Gabrielle had released her father's hand and moved to stand directly beside Harry, her small shoulder against his arm. It was such a natural, unthinking movement that nobody noticed it except Apollon, whose eyes tracked it with an expression that was equal parts wonder and heartbreak. The ministry officials arrived, robes rustling, badges gleaming, wands put away when they assessed the situation and decided that showing them would be inadvisable in a corridor containing one Veela matriarch who looked like she'd made weapons illegal before. "What's the situation here?" The senior official, a stocky woman with a clipboard and the practiced bureaucratic calm of someone who has handled everything from dragon breaches to accidental transfigurations of members of parliament, was looking at the crowd, the scorch marks on the floor where the brand pulse had been strongest, and the small cluster of people at the center. "The situation," Apollon said clearly, so that the entire corridor could hear, "is that my daughter and my second daughter have both branded the same soul. Simultaneously. The child standing before me is the Fujimo carrier." She paused. "I would like someone to explain to me why this child, who carries, as I understand it, the greatest dark mark defeat in British magical history, is here in this corridor wearing shoes that do not fit him." The corridor, which had been getting gradually noisier as the shock wore off and the gossip instincts kicked in, went very quiet again. Harry looked down at Dudley's trainers. He curled his toes inside them instinctively, the way he always did when he wanted to hide something, but there wasn't anything to hide. The shoes were too big. That was just true. He looked back up. The stocky ministry woman was writing something on her clipboard very quickly, and there was a quality to her speed that suggested she was trying not to look at Harry's shoes. Vernon, who had been standing in furious silence since Apollon had frozen him out, chose this moment to reassert himself. "Now look here," he said, with the blustering confidence of a man who has never been seriously challenged, "I don't know what's going on with these people and this light show, but that boy is our responsibility and he's coming with us and you can all take your, Vernon." Petunia's voice was low and warning. It was too late. Apollon turned. She didn't raise a wand. She barely seemed to move. But the warmth that radiated from her was not warm in the comfortable sense, it was warm in the way that a fire is warm when you're standing too close, the kind of warmth that reminds you it could burn. "Your responsibility," she said quietly. "Tell me. As this child's responsible guardian. What is his favorite food?" Vernon blinked. "What? His favorite food? If he is in your care, you know him. His favorite food. His favorite, what does he like to play? What makes him laugh? What does he dream about?" Silence. "Tell me his shoe size," Apollon said, and her voice had dropped to something absolutely level, which was somehow worse than anything louder. "Just his shoe size." Vernon opened his mouth. Closed it. Harry watched him. He already knew Vernon didn't know his shoe size, he'd never been taken to a shoe shop, the trainers came from Dudley's discard pile whenever Dudley grew out of them, but watching someone else point it out was a strange experience. Like seeing a thing he'd always known was true suddenly written down. The ministry woman had stopped writing. "Monsieur," said Jacques Delacour, who had been quiet until this moment, a large, calm presence at the edge of the scene, to Vernon, in excellent English, with the particular gentleness of a man choosing his words so that they would land without room for argument, "I think it would be best for everyone if you allowed the officials to take things from here." It was not a suggestion. It was framed as one, but the frame was built of something solid. Vernon looked at Jacques. At Apollon. At the ministry official with the clipboard. At the crowd of magical people who were watching him with the specific expression of people who have formed an opinion and are not changing it. He went very red. And then he went very still. And then, with the stiff-legged dignity of a man in full retreat, he took Petunia's arm and steered her, and a bewildered Dudley, toward the far end of the corridor. "We'll be in our seats," he said, to no one in particular. "When you're done with this nonsense." Nobody responded. He left. Harry watched him go. He felt something, watching Vernon walk away. He wasn't sure what it was. Not relief, exactly, relief implies you were afraid, and he hadn't been, particularly. Not triumph. It was smaller than triumph and more personal. It was the feeling of watching a door close on something that had been loud for a long time. Harry. Apollon was beside him again, her voice different now, softer, the ice entirely gone. Come. We will find somewhere to sit, and I will explain everything properly. All right? He looked up at her. In the distance, Fleur was speaking to one of the ministry officials in quiet, rapid English, answering questions with the composed patience of someone who has decided not to lose her temper yet. Gabrielle was still beside Harry, and when he moved to follow Apollon, Gabrielle moved with him, her shoulder against his arm again. Okay, Harry said. He fell into step with the Delacour family, and for the first time in 6 years, he didn't walk 3 steps behind. There was a room beneath the premium terraces that the stadium's management used for post-match briefings, large enough for a table and chairs, small enough to feel enclosed, with high windows that let in the ambient roar of the crowd beginning to fill the stands above. The ministry official, her name, Harry gathered, was Madame Bones, and she had a monocle that she kept adjusting as though it were giving her information she wasn't quite sure how to file, sat at the head of the table with her clipboard and 2 subordinates who took notes. Dumbledore sat on one side, quiet and watchful. The Delacours sat on the other. Harry sat in the middle, on a chair that was slightly too tall for him, his feet not quite reaching the floor. The Fujimo, Madame Bones said, as though reading it from the clipboard. In all of recorded Veela history, there have been, she consulted a subordinate, who whispered something. 4 verified cases. 3, Apollon corrected, without inflection. The Marchetti case in 1743 was never confirmed. Madame Bones made a note. 3. Madame Delacour, can you confirm that both your daughters initiated the brand simultaneously? The corridor full of witnesses can confirm it, Apollon said. A pause. Yes. Right. More notes. And the child, she looked at Harry, and Harry looked back at her with polite attention. Mr. Potter. You are aware of who you are? Your status in our world? Harry thought about this with the same seriousness he applied to all questions. You mean my scar, he said. Madame Bones blinked. Yes. Among other things. Uncle Vernon says not to talk about it. But people look at it a lot when they're trying to be sneaky. He said this without particular bitterness, just observation. I don't know much about it. Nobody's explained it. The subordinates had stopped writing. There was a specific quality to the silence that followed, the quality of several adults realizing simultaneously that a 6-year-old who had defeated the most dangerous dark wizard of the century had apparently never been told the story. Dumbledore's voice, when it came, was very careful. Harry. There are things about your history that I had intended. He is 6 years old, Apollon said, not loudly, and he does not know why people stare at his forehead. Please. She looked at Dumbledore, and the look was the sort that should have left a mark. Please spare us the intended. Dumbledore was quiet. He was not, Harry would later understand, a man who was often quiet when he had the option to speak. The fact that he said nothing now meant something, though Harry didn't yet know what. What is the Fujimo? Harry asked. He directed the question at Apollon, because she'd given him straight answers before. Apollon turned to him. You know what a Veela is? No. My daughters and I are part Veela. A Veela is a magical being. Very old. We carry fire, in a way. Not literally, well, sometimes literally, but the fire is a part of our magic. When a Veela finds someone they are meant to bond with, there is a mark. A brand. It is permanent. It connects the Veela and the carrier forever. She paused. Normally this happens once. One Veela, one carrier. But your daughters both did it, Harry said. At the same moment. Yes. Apollon's voice was steady, but her hands, Harry noticed, were clasped very tightly in her lap. This is the Fujimo. The twin fire. It means that you are the one person in the world who carries the mark of both my daughters. That the bond between all three of you is not two separate bonds, but one, shared. Interconnected. Harry looked from Apollon to Fleur, who was watching him with an expression he was starting to be able to read, that fierce, helpless attention. Then to Gabrielle, who was sitting beside him and had at some point during the last 5 minutes taken his hand with the matter-of-fact confidence of someone who has already decided this is how things are. "Does it hurt them?" he asked. Apollon blinked. It was the only crack in her composure, but it was real. "No," she said, after a moment. "No, it does not hurt them." "Does it hurt me?" "It should not." "Does it?" He shook his head. "It feels warm." Like, he searched for the right word. Like how a blanket feels in winter. Fleur pressed her hand against her mouth again. Her eyes were very bright. "Good," Apollon said quietly. "That is good." Madame Bones cleared her throat. She had the expression of someone who has been moved by something and is trying to return to procedure as a form of self-defense. "This is all. There will need to be formal documentation. The bond will need to be certified by the Department of Mysteries. There is also the question of guardianship, and the protection that was in place, and, the protection," Dumbledore said, and his voice was careful, measured, every word placed with intention, was put in place for very good reasons. "The blood ward on Privet Drive is broken," Apollon said flatly. "The Fujimo supersedes a blood ward. You know this." Dumbledore's expression didn't change. "I know that there are arguments for that position. It is not a position. It is documented fact in the Veela Compendium, which your ministry's Department of Mysteries has a copy of and which I would be very happy to have fetched." Apollon looked at the subordinates. Both of them looked at Madame Bones. Madame Bones looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at Harry. Harry looked back at him. In that moment, in the crossfire of adults debating his life over his head with the best and worst of intentions, Harry said the thing that had been sitting in his chest since Apollon had told him he mattered. "Does this mean I don't have to go back?" He said it quietly. Not hopefully. Hope was a thing he'd learned to keep behind his teeth. He said it the way he said everything, matter of fact, straight, like a person asking whether it might rain. The room went still in a way that had nothing to do with magic. Madame Bones set down her quill. One of the subordinates looked at the window. Apollon made a sound that was very small and very controlled. She reached over and put her hand over Gabrielle's, which was still holding Harry's. Fleur looked at the table and pressed her lips together and did not look up for a long moment. Dumbledore, who had lived a very long life and seen a very great many things, looked at Harry Potter, 6 years old, shoes 2 sizes too big, asking with no particular inflection whether he had to go back, and for one unguarded second the management slipped, and the expression underneath it was one of pure, uncomplicated pain. "No, my boy," he said. "Not tonight." It wasn't the full answer. Harry could tell that, even at 6. It was the answer you give when the full answer is too complicated for the moment, the answer that holds the door open without committing to what's behind it. But it was enough for now. He nodded. "Okay." Above them, the crowd roared, the teams were taking the field, the match was beginning, and the afternoon was folding into evening around them. Through the high windows, Harry could see the sky going amber and gold, and in the distance, 2 brooms crossing in the dying light. Gabrielle, who had said almost nothing since the corridor, leaned her head against Harry's arm. He sat very still, because he was afraid that if he moved, she'd stop. She didn't stop. She stayed exactly where she was, small and certain and warm, while above them the crowd cheered something he couldn't see, and the adults began the careful, complicated work of dismantling the world as it had been and building something else in its place. Harry looked at the amber square of the window. At the flying shapes beyond it. He didn't think about Privet Drive. He didn't think about the cupboard or the twine belt or the shoes. He thought about the warmth below his sternum, steady as a heartbeat, and about a little girl who had walked across a crowded corridor to stand in front of him and said she'd been waiting. He was 6 years old and he had no idea what was coming. He was, for the first time in his life, not afraid of it. Chapter 2, Fujimo. The room beneath the premium terraces had good acoustics for arguments. Harry discovered this about 40 minutes after the match started, when the door opened and 3 more ministry officials arrived, followed by a man in red robes with a prophet badge pinned to his lapel who was very quickly told to leave by Madame Bones, who had a way of saying out that left no grammatical room for negotiation. Then came a healer in lime green robes who wanted to examine Harry and introduced herself as Healer Marchbanks, and then, like the universe had decided the room needed more people with opinions, Arthur Weasley arrived, slightly out of breath, with a smear of something unidentifiable on his left sleeve and the expression of a man who had heard something extraordinary and run toward it rather than away. "Amelia," he said to Madame Bones, shaking her hand with the warmth of someone who means it. "I was in the stands, I felt the pulse, is it true? The Fujimo?" He looked across the room and his eyes landed on Harry, and his face did something complicated and genuine. "Oh. Oh, Harry, my boy." Harry had met Arthur Weasley once, at a ministry event that Vernon had attended under duress and Harry had been brought to because Petunia had nobody to leave him with. He didn't know him well. But Arthur had called him my boy with the same warmth he probably used on his own 7 children, and Harry noticed this the way he noticed everything, quietly, and without showing that he'd noticed. "Hello, Mr. Weasley," he said. Arthur crossed the room and crouched down in the way that adults who are good with children always do, making himself smaller, putting himself at eye level. His eyes were bright and slightly wet. "How are you feeling? Are you all right?" "Everyone keeps asking me that," Harry said. "I'm fine." It felt warm. Yes. Yes, I imagine it did. Arthur put a hand briefly on Harry's shoulder, a gentle, unpresumptuous contact, and stood up. He looked at Apollon Delacour, and his expression shifted into something respectful and careful. "Madame Delacour." "Arthur Weasley, misuse of Muggle artifacts." This is extraordinary." "The twin fire." He shook his head slowly. "I've read about it. I didn't think I'd see," he stopped himself. "Is there anything the family needs?" Apollon's expression thawed by a few degrees. People who asked what was needed rather than what was happening were, in her experience, the useful kind. "Information," she said. "Honestly provided." Arthur glanced at Dumbledore. Something passed between them, not hostility, exactly, but the particular tension of 2 people who respect each other and currently disagree. "I'll do my best," he said. Healer Marchbanks had established herself beside Harry with the brisk competence of someone who has decided the most useful thing to do is the medical thing and is not going to be derailed by politics. She had a wand that she was passing slowly over Harry in diagnostic patterns, and her expression was professionally neutral in the way that professional neutrality sometimes isn't. "He's physically healthy," she said, to the room rather than to any one person. "Well within normal parameters for his age." A pause. "His weight is slightly low," she added, and the slightly was doing enormous heavy lifting. "How low?" said Apollon. Another pause. "I'd like to run some additional checks before." "How low?" Apollon said again, and this time it was not a question. Healer Marchbanks looked at her clipboard. Roughly the 5th percentile for his height and age group. The silence that followed was of the kind that has texture. Madame Bones had stopped writing again. Arthur Weasley was looking at the middle distance with the expression of a man controlling something. Fleur, who had been sitting at the far end of the table with one of the ministry subordinates walking her through preliminary bond documentation, had stopped answering questions. 5th percentile, Apollon repeated, and her voice was so controlled it was frightening. "It's not, at this stage it doesn't indicate anything that can't be addressed with, thank you, Healer Marchbanks." Apollon folded her hands on the table. Thank you very much. Harry, who was sitting beside Gabrielle and had been listening to the adults discuss his body with the resigned patience of someone accustomed to being discussed rather than addressed, looked at the healer and said, I eat fine. We just don't always have a lot. More silence. You don't have to, Arthur started. It's true, Harry said, not defensively, just correcting the record. There's plenty when there's plenty. Sometimes there isn't plenty. He said it like a weather report. Cold in winter. Not plenty sometimes. Gabrielle, beside him, had gone very still. She was looking at her mother with the gray-eyed gravity of a 4-year-old who understands more than she has words for. Maman, she said quietly. Je sais, ma petite, Apollon said. I know, little one. Her voice was very soft. I know. Dumbledore, who had been largely silent since his not tonight and was giving off the impression of a man choosing his battles with strategic care, leaned forward slightly. I want to say, for the record, that Harry's placement was your decision, Apollon said. Was made with the best available information and the most pressing magical considerations. He has a hole in his shoe. A pause. The left one, Harry supplied helpfully, because accuracy mattered. Dumbledore looked at Harry's shoes. And then he looked at Harry, and the pain was back, that unguarded thing that appeared behind the management when it slipped, and he said, I know, and it came out differently than any of his other words. Not managed. Just true. Right, said Madame Bones, with the decisive energy of someone seizing the moment to move things forward. I think what we need to do tonight is establish some immediate next steps. Mr. Potter's current guardianship situation will need to be formally reviewed in light of the bond and the circumstances. She said circumstances in a way that covered a lot of ground. Madame Delacour, it is my understanding that under the Veela Covenant of 1847, a Fujimo carrier falls under provisional sanctuary with the bonded family pending a formal Wizengamot determination. Is that your reading as well? It is, said a new voice from the doorway. Everyone looked. The woman standing there was old, genuinely old, in the way that few magical people looked old because they could charm it away but hadn't bothered, which suggested she considered it irrelevant. She was small and silver-haired with sharp dark eyes and wore robes of deep red that were immaculately cut and entirely at odds with the stadium corridor she'd walked through to get here. She was carrying a walking stick that she didn't seem to lean on, but held more like a scepter. Apollon stood up immediately, and the movement was instinctive, not subservient, but respectful in the specific way you are respectful to something old and powerful and related to you. Grandmere, she said. Sit down, Apollon. You've been on your feet all afternoon. The old woman crossed the room with the walking stick tapping a brisk, unhurried rhythm and settled into an empty chair at the table as though she'd been invited to a dinner party. Her dark eyes swept the room, Dumbledore, who straightened very slightly, Madame Bones, who blinked, Arthur Weasley, who looked like he wanted to offer her tea, before landing on Harry. She looked at him for a long time. Harry looked back. Hello, he said. Hello, she said, in accented English, and unlike most adults, she didn't follow it with anything patronizing or too kind. She just looked at him steadily. I am Celeste Beaumont Delacour. I am the grandmother of Apollon and the great-grandmother of these two girls. She tilted her head toward Fleur and Gabrielle. I am also one of 3 living people who has seen a confirmed Veela bond ignition in person. She paused. The other 2 are currently in France and will be very put out that they missed this. Something about the dry flatness of the last sentence made Harry's mouth twitch. Celeste caught it. One corner of her own mouth moved. You find that funny? A little. Good. It was meant to be. She set her walking stick across her knees. Now. I understand that several adults in this room have spent the last hour discussing your future. Has anyone thought to ask you what you want? Harry processed this. In 6 years of being discussed, argued about, assessed by teachers and occasionally by doctors who came to the school to weigh everyone, and managed by Dumbledore and neglected by the Dursleys and quietly watched by neighbors who didn't intervene. Nobody had asked him that question. "No," he said. Celeste looked around the table with the serene displeasure of someone who is not surprised but is nonetheless keeping score. "Well, we will get to that." She looked at Dumbledore. "Albus. The Blood Ward is a sophisticated protection that is void," Celeste said. "The moment the Fujimo ignited, the bond overrode the ward source parameters. You know this. I suspect you have known it for the last hour and have been constructing alternative arguments." She tilted her head. "How many of them have you tried so far?" Dumbledore's expression was hard to read. "Celeste. You know that I have Harry's well-being at heart." "Yes." She looked at him for a moment that went on just slightly too long. "I know that you do, Albus. That is not what is in question." She leaned forward slightly. "What is in question is whether your version of Harry's well-being has any resemblance to what Harry's well-being actually requires. Based on the evidence of this afternoon, I have some concerns." "The evidence of this afternoon is extraordinary and unprecedented. The evidence of this afternoon is a 6-year-old boy in ill-fitting shoes who asked whether he had to go home." Celeste set her walking stick on the table. The sound of it was small and very definite. "That evidence, Albus, has nothing to do with bonds or prophecies or the complex architecture of your plans. It is simply true." Dumbledore was quiet. "Right," said Madame Bones, who had been following this exchange with the focused attention of a woman memorizing every word for the official report. "So. The Covenant of 1847, Grandmere Beaumont Delacour, you were referencing the Provisional Sanctuary Clause?" "Article 7, Celeste confirmed. A confirmed Fujimo carrier becomes the provisional ward of the bonded family's matriarch pending Wizengamot adjudication. The process is meant to take no more than 30 days. She paused. "In this case, the matriarch is Apollon." "The child is a British citizen," Dumbledore said. Under British magical law, the Covenant of 1847 was ratified by the Wizengamot in the same session as the Veela Alliance Treaty, which your ministry very much wanted and got. You do not get the treaty without honoring the Covenant." Celeste looked at him pleasantly. "I checked before I walked in here." Arthur Weasley, who had been sitting quietly at the edge of the room, made a sound that was quickly converted into a cough. Dumbledore looked at Madame Bones. Madame Bones looked at her subordinates, one of whom was already flipping through a leather-bound reference volume with the frantic energy of someone speed-reading. The subordinate found the page, read it, looked up, and gave a single, very small nod. "Article 7, Madame Bones said." She wrote something on her clipboard. "Provisional Sanctuary. 30 days pending Wizengamot determination." She tapped her quill against the clipboard. "Mr. Potter will need to remain in Britain for the hearing, but there is no legal requirement that he stays with us," Apollon said, with the finality of a door closing. "Apollon." Dumbledore's voice had a new quality now, not urgent, but careful. "The protections that Harry has at Privet Drive exist because of a very specific magical architecture that took years to, Albus." Apollon met his gaze. "Look at my daughters." He looked. Fleur, who had abandoned the bond documentation completely, was sitting at the table with her arms folded and an expression that said she was deciding how much of what she was thinking to say out loud. Gabrielle was leaning against Harry's arm again, her head tilted toward him in a posture so natural it looked like gravity. "The bond is formed," Apollon said. "The architecture you are describing, the ward, the blood protection, functions on the principle of the nearest living blood relative providing sanctuary. That principle has been superseded. He has new sanctuary now." She paused. "Older sanctuary. The Veela bond is not a legal guardianship structure. Article 7 disagrees with you." Apollon didn't look away. And I think, in your heart, Albus, you know that I am right. The question you are actually wrestling with is not whether he can come to us. The question is whether your plan survives it. The room was very still. Dumbledore looked at Harry again. Harry was watching this exchange with the patient, observational attention of a child who has spent his whole life learning to read rooms, and he was reading this one correctly. There was a man who wanted to keep him somewhere because it served a purpose, and a woman who wanted to take him somewhere because it served him, and the two things were not the same. He wasn't angry at Dumbledore. He just saw him clearly, and that was enough. I have a plan, Dumbledore said quietly, to Harry directly. Not to the room. To Harry. A plan that was designed to protect you. To protect many people. I need you to know that. Okay, Harry said. It may not look like I've been taking care of you. But everything, it's all right, Harry said. And he meant it, in a way, not as an absolution, but because he was 6 and the future was abstract and the present was Gabrielle leaning against his arm. You can tell me about the plan when I'm older. Fleur made a sound that was definitely a laugh this time. She covered it with her hand. Even Celeste's mouth moved. Dumbledore looked at Harry for a long moment. Then something in him, not the management, not the careful balance of information and wisdom, but something underneath all of that, settled. Yes, he said quietly. I suppose I can. The practical work took another hour. Forms were signed. Madame Bones produced the relevant clauses of the covenant and had them ratified on the spot by 3 witnesses, one of whom was Arthur Weasley, who signed with the slightly shaky enthusiasm of a man who knows he'll hear about this later and thinks it's worth it. Healer Marchbanks completed her examination and provided a health documentation sheet that she handed directly to Apollon without reading aloud, which was a professional courtesy and also a kindness. Celeste Beaumont Delacour sat at the table and watched everything with the unhurried attention of a woman who had all the time she needed and knew it. At some point during the form signing, Fleur came and sat beside Harry. She didn't make a production of it. She simply moved from the far end of the table to the chair on Harry's left, leaving Gabrielle on his right, and sat down. She was 11, and the bond was new, and she hadn't quite worked out what to do with the feeling of it yet, the warmth in her chest, the awareness of Harry like a compass needle pointing home, but she knew that sitting near him was better than sitting away from him, so that was what she did. Does it always feel like this? Harry asked her, quietly enough that it was just for her. Like what? Warm. Even when you're not near me. Fleur looked at him. Her expression went through several versions before settling on honest. I don't know. It's new for me too. She paused. Grandmere says it will become, she says you learn to carry it. That it becomes part of how you breathe. Harry thought about this. That doesn't sound bad. No, Fleur agreed. It doesn't. Gabrielle, without looking up from the small sugar phoenix that someone, probably Arthur, had conjured for her and that she was making fly slow loops over the table, said, Il est à nous maintenant. He is ours now. She says, Fleur started. I know, Apollon said, from across the table, without looking up from the form she was signing. She's right. Harry looked at the sugar phoenix looping over the table. It dipped toward him and then away, amber wings catching the light. He put his finger out and it landed on it. He went very still, not wanting to startle it, and it stayed, warm against his fingertip, the tiny, perfect detail of its feathers moving in a way that sugar absolutely should not be able to do. Gabrielle looked up at this and her face broke into the widest, most delighted smile Harry had ever seen on another person, and it was so sudden and so real that something in his chest, not the brand, something older, something that had been carefully boarded up for 6 years, cracked just slightly open. He smiled back. Not the careful, neutral expression he normally wore. A real one, small and surprised, the kind that happens before you decide whether to have it. Fleur, who was watching both of them, looked away at the ceiling and blinked several times and said nothing. The forms were finished. The Dursleys, tracked down in the stands by a ministry official, were informed of the provisional arrangement and handed documentation they were required to sign. Petunia had cried, not from grief, Harry thought, but from the specific panic of someone whose careful, controlled domestic structure had just become complicated. Vernon had gone very red and talked about solicitors, and the ministry official had explained with professional patience that Muggle solicitors did not have jurisdiction over Wizengamot provisional orders, which had made Vernon redder. Neither of them had asked to see Harry. He noticed this. He put it in the same place as all the other things he'd noticed and continued with. They were staying, tonight, at a Wizarding Inn near the stadium. The Delacours had rooms booked, and provisional arrangements were made for Harry to stay there under Bond sanctuary protocols, which apparently meant a ministry owl had to be sent to the Department of Magical Cooperation before 8 p.m. Arthur sent it himself, muttering something about bureaucracy that suggested he had opinions. The stadium had finished its match by the time they got outside. Montrose had won, apparently, and the crowds were streaming out in every direction, loud and happy, the particular energy of people who have watched something good and are now translating it into conversation. The sky was deep blue and full of stars, and the stadium lamps were still blazing gold. Harry walked through it all with the Delacours. Not 3 steps behind. Just, with them. Celeste walked beside him for a few minutes, her walking stick tapping the cobbled path. She didn't say anything at first. She simply walked, and Harry walked, and the crowd moved around them. "You are not frightened," she said eventually. "Not as a compliment. Just as an observation." "Should I be?" "Many children would be." Harry thought about this honestly. "I've had a weird day. But mostly it's been good weird." Celeste made a short, approving sound. "Good weird." "Yes." She glanced down at him. "You feel the bond. The warmth." "Yes. It will grow. Not in a way that overwhelms, the Fujimo is not like that. It expands as you expand." She paused. "It is connected to who you become." "What does that mean?" "It means that the bond knows you are not finished." She said it matter-of-factly. "The fire that was lit today was lit in a seed, not a tree. It will grow with the roots." Harry turned this over. "Like a plant. Like a fire that feeds on becoming rather than burning." He thought about it. "That's a better metaphor." Celeste looked at him with her sharp dark eyes and said, very quietly, "Yes, I think you will do." He didn't ask what he would do for. The answer was probably everything, and that was a very large answer for one day. The inn was called the Goldfinch and the Gold, which Harry thought was a good name for somewhere, and it was warm inside with low ceilings and the smell of wood smoke and bread and something sweet that turned out to be a dessert charm on the kitchen door that produced the smell of whatever you most wanted. Harry stood in the entrance hall and smelled something that after a moment he identified, with a slight surprise, as the healer's office at school, antiseptic and that particular soap, which apparently his brain had filed under place where someone took care of me without consulting him about it. He filed this information away. Jacques Delacour, who had been a steady, quiet presence throughout the afternoon, the kind of person who makes themselves useful without drawing attention to it, got the room keys from the proprietor and turned to Harry with the direct, uncomplicated friendliness of a man who had decided to simply be kind and not make it complicated. "You will have your own room," he said. "If you prefer. Or Fleur and Gabrielle have. Gabrielle usually stays with Fleur when we travel." He paused. "We will not make any assumptions. What would you like?" Harry thought about the cupboard. Then he thought about the small room he'd had since Dudley got 2 rooms and Harry got the smaller one. Small, yes, but his. He thought about sleeping alone and the way silence could be either peaceful or just empty depending on the direction of things. "My own room is fine," he said. And then, because something in him wanted the option to be said out loud, Can I come find you if I need something?" Jacques put his hand on Harry's shoulder. It was the same gesture Arthur had used, gentle, unpresumptuous, there and then gone. Of course, he said simply. Any time. The room was small and yellow-painted with a window that looked onto the inn's garden and a bed that had an actual mattress, by which Harry meant one that didn't have broken springs that dug into your side if you rolled wrong. The bed had 4 pillows and a quilt that was slightly too heavy for August but perfectly fine for magic. There was a wardrobe that he had nothing to put in and a desk and a small lamp that glowed warm amber. He sat on the edge of the bed and took off Dudley's trainers and put them beside the door. He looked at them for a moment. Then he looked at the room, which was simple and clean and his for tonight, and at the window where the inn's garden was dark with shapes of foxglove and lavender catching the moonlight, and he pressed his hand flat against his sternum the way Fleur had done, his fingers spread, feeling the warmth of the brand against his palm. It was there. Steady and warm and real, like the most reliable thing he'd ever had. A knock at the door, light, quick, the knock of someone who is trying not to presume. "Come in," he said. Apollon opened the door. She was carrying a glass of warm milk and a plate with 2 biscuits on it and wore an expression that was carefully casual in a way that meant it wasn't casual at all. "I thought you might be hungry," she said. Harry was hungry. He was almost always at least a little hungry, which was something he'd stopped thinking about the way you stop thinking about background noise. "Thank you," he said. She set the glass and the plate on the desk and then stood for a moment in the way adults stand when they have something to say and are choosing whether to say it. "Harry," she said. "Yes? I need to say something to you." She moved to the desk chair and sat on its edge, which put her at nearly his level. "What happened today, the bond, the brand, it is not something that was done to you. I want to be clear about that." She paused. "The Fujimo does not obligate you. You are not owned. You are not a prize. You do not belong to my daughters in the way that a thing belongs to a person." She looked at him steadily. "You belong to yourself. The bond simply means that there is a connection. A permanent one. What is built on it is a choice." Harry listened to this. "But it's already there." "Yes. I didn't choose it." "No. Neither did they." She folded her hands in her lap. "Love, even the magical kind, is rarely chosen in its beginning. It is chosen in its continuation. Every day." She tilted her head. "Does the warmth feel wrong to you? Like something imposed?" He thought about it honestly. "No. How does it feel?" He thought about the little sugar phoenix on his finger, and Fleur's expression when she moved to sit beside him, and Gabrielle's hand in his, and the matter-of-fact way Celeste had said "I think you will do." "Like I'm somewhere I'm supposed to be," he said. Apollon looked at him for a moment. Then she smiled, not the diplomatic smile she'd used in the meeting room, not the eyes she'd turned on Vernon, but something warm and real, the smile of a woman who loves her children and has just understood something about the boy who is now linked to them. "Yes," she said softly. "That is exactly right." She said goodnight and left him to his biscuits and his warm milk and the amber lamp. Harry ate the biscuits, they were better than anything at Privet Drive, buttery and slightly salted, and drank the milk and looked at the garden. He was thinking about what Apollon had said. What is built on it is a choice. He thought about all the things he'd never been given a choice about, the cupboard, the chores, the 2 big shoes, the way he moved 3 steps behind. He'd never resented it, exactly, because resentment requires believing something should have been different, and he'd never had enough information to know what different looked like. He was getting information now. A different knock, very small, barely a sound at all. He crossed to the door and opened it. Gabrielle was standing in the corridor in pajamas with small yellow ducks on them, holding a stuffed rabbit by one ear. She was looking up at him with those serious gray eyes. "Gabrielle," he said, careful with the French of it, watching her face to see if he'd got it right. She nodded. Then she held out the stuffed rabbit. He took it carefully, because she was offering it seriously and it deserved to be taken seriously. She said something in French that he couldn't follow, then seemed to remember, and said in the careful, concentrated English of someone who knows it but doesn't use it often, "So you are not alone in the dark." She said it with such matter-of-fact certainty, like this was a simple and obvious provision, like of course you send your rabbit with someone who is new and alone. Then she turned and padded back down the corridor to the room she shared with Fleur, her duck pajamas disappearing around the corner without drama. Harry stood in the doorway holding the stuffed rabbit. He looked down at it. It was very well loved, the velvet worn smooth on the ears where it had been held, a button eye slightly loose, a small embroidered name on the foot that said, in French, Lapin. He went back to the bed and lay down with the rabbit beside him, and the quilt was too heavy for August but perfect for something else, and the lamp glowed amber in the corner of the room, and the brand was warm below his sternum. He was asleep before he'd decided to sleep, which was the best kind. Down the corridor, Fleur lay awake in the dark with her hand pressed to her chest, feeling the warmth of the bond and the faint, additional warmth that told her the carrier was at peace. "Is he asleep?" Gabrielle asked from her side of the bed, eyes closed, already most of the way there herself. "Yes," Fleur said. "Good," Gabrielle said, with complete satisfaction. "I knew it would be him." Fleur stared at the ceiling. The warmth in her chest was enormous and terrifying and the most real thing she had ever felt. "Gabrielle," she said. "How did you know?" But Gabrielle was already asleep. Fleur lay there for a long time, feeling the steady warmth of two people sleeping, her sister beside her, Harry down the corridor, and outside the window the stars were doing their indifferent, ancient thing, and somewhere in the Department of Mysteries an owl had delivered a form that no one had ever filed before, and in a room off a corridor in the Ministry building, a junior clerk pulled out the Veela compendium and turned to the section on the Fujimo and read it, and set it down, and picked it up and read it again. In Dumbledore's office, the silver instruments whirred. One of them, the one that had been tracking Harry's well-being for 6 years through the blood ward, that pulsed a gentle blue when the ward was holding, had changed color. It was gold now. It was warm to the touch. Dumbledore sat at his desk and looked at it for a long time in the dark. Then he picked up a quill and began to write. Chapter 3, The Weight of Ancient Fire. The French ministry arrived on Tuesday. Not a letter, not an owl, the actual ministry. 3 officials in deep navy robes with silver trim, carrying satchels full of documentation and the particular energy of people who had been briefed extensively on the way over and were ready to begin immediately. They arrived at the Goldfinch and the Gold at 8:30 in the morning while Harry was eating breakfast, real breakfast, the kind where someone asked what you wanted and then made it, which was still producing a small, surprised feeling in his chest every time it happened, and they brought with them a woman named Advocate Beaumont, who was not related to Celeste despite the name and who had the focused, precise bearing of someone who had argued cases before the ICW and won. Apollon met them in the inn's front room with Celeste beside her, which was, Harry gathered from watching the French officials' expressions when they saw the old woman, approximately equivalent to arriving at a negotiation with a cannon. Harry ate his eggs. Fleur came down 20 minutes after the officials, still pinning her hair up with one hand, saw the navy robes and said something under her breath in French that her mother definitely heard because Apollon gave her a specific look without turning around, which was an impressive piece of parenting. "What is it?" Harry asked. Fleur sat across from him and stole a piece of his toast with the comfortable ease of someone who had already decided certain things about the nature of their relationship. "French ministry. They want to be involved. They will argue about jurisdiction for approximately 2 hours and then agree to share it." She bit the toast. "It is always this way. Does it get decided in our favor?" Fleur looked at him over the toast. "Notre faveur," she corrected, making the point. "Our favor. And yes. Because Grandmere is in there." She tilted her head toward the front room. "When Grandmere is in a room, things are decided the way Grandmere wants them decided. This is simply how the world works." Harry considered this. "She's impressive." "She is terrifying," Fleur said, without any particular disapproval. "I love her very much." Gabrielle appeared at the top of the stairs in her duck pajamas, surveyed the situation, came down and climbed into the chair beside Harry, and said to Fleur in French something that made Fleur roll her eyes. Harry looked between them. "She wants to know if there are croissants," Fleur translated. "There are," said the proprietor's wife, materializing from the kitchen with the sixth sense of someone who has run a hospitality establishment for 30 years. She produced croissants, and Gabrielle received one with the gravity of a diplomat accepting a peace treaty. The negotiations in the front room ran for 2.5 hours. Fleur's estimate had been generous, and produced, ultimately, a joint British-French oversight agreement on Harry's provisional placement, which Advocate Beaumont described in clipped, efficient terms, and Madame Bones, who had arrived at 9 o'clock with her clipboard and a second cup of tea she hadn't touched, accepted with the expression of someone who has recognized the better position. Dumbledore arrived at 10. He came through the inn's fireplace in the back parlor, which was the designated flue point, and Harry heard the green flame and the faint rush of the flue and then Dumbledore's footsteps in the corridor, and there was a brief, low conversation at the door before Dumbledore appeared in the breakfast room. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at him. "Good morning," Harry said. "Good morning, Harry." Dumbledore sat down across from him, in Fleur's chair, since Fleur had gone to join the negotiations, and folded his hands on the table and looked at Harry with those blue eyes that saw too much and gave too little. "How did you sleep?" "Well," Harry said. He didn't mention the stuffed rabbit, which was upstairs, because that felt private. "I'm glad." Dumbledore paused. "Harry. I'd like to talk to you, if I may. Not about the legal situation, that will take care of itself. About you." Harry waited. "I know," Dumbledore said, "that you have grown up without a great deal of explanation. That is," he stopped. Started again. "There are things I will tell you. About your parents. About what happened. About why you are who you are in our world." He was looking at Harry with the directness of someone who had decided to be direct, which was different from his usual mode, and Harry could feel the difference. "I would like to begin that now, if you'll let me." Harry thought about it. "Okay," he said. "But I have a question first." "Of course. Did you know? About how things were at the Dursleys?" The question was simple and flat and honest, and it landed in the space between them like something dropped from a height. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. The blue eyes didn't look away. "I knew it would not be comfortable," he said. "I knew there would be difficulties. I believed the magical protection was worth the cost of those difficulties." "But you didn't check," Harry said. Not accusatory. Just finishing the sentence. Another pause. Longer. "Not as often as I should have," Dumbledore said. "No." Harry nodded. He put it in the same place as everything else and said, "Okay. Tell me about my parents." And Dumbledore did. He talked for an hour, about James and Lily Potter, about a war Harry hadn't known was a war, about a man named Voldemort whose name everyone else flinched at and Harry decided immediately he would not flinch at, about a night in Godric's Hollow and a sacrifice and a love so powerful it had done something that had never been done before. He explained the scar and the prophecy and the blood ward and the reason, the real reason, Harry had grown up where he grew up. Harry listened to all of it. When Dumbledore finished, there was a quiet that was not uncomfortable, the quiet of someone processing rather than reacting. "Voldemort isn't actually gone," Harry said. "Is he?" Dumbledore looked at him. "No. Not entirely. He'll come back." "I believe so." "Yes." Harry thought about this. A dark wizard who had killed his parents and marked him and wasn't really dead and would eventually come back. He ran it through his head and came out the other side with a feeling that was less fear and more something like the satisfying click of a puzzle piece finding its place. It explained a lot, actually. It explained the staring and the whispers and the way the whole magical Britain had held its breath around him without him knowing. "So there's a prophecy that says I have to fight him," Harry said. That is one interpretation. Is it a wrong interpretation? Dumbledore's expression did something careful. It is a simplified one. But not wrong. Not wrong. Harry ate the last of his toast. All right, he said. Dumbledore blinked. All right? Yes. Harry put his fork down. I mean, what else would I say? That's the situation. We deal with the situation. He looked at Dumbledore. I'd like to learn. About magic. About what I can do. I want to understand what I'm going to be dealing with so I can deal with it properly. He paused. And I'd like to do that with the Delacours, because the brand is there and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. Dumbledore looked at him for a long time. Whatever he saw in Harry's face, that clear, 6-year-old practicality, the absence of drama, made him smile, and this time the smile was real. Tired and real and a little sad around the edges. Your father, he said, would have said almost exactly that. Was he good? My dad? He was brave and funny and occasionally very foolish, and he loved your mother in a way that was genuinely inconvenient for everyone around them. Dumbledore's eyes were bright. He was very good. Harry absorbed this. And my mum? Your mother was the cleverest, kindest person I have ever known. Dumbledore said it simply and it rang completely true. The sacrifice she made was an act of pure love. Not accident. Choice. Harry sat with that for a moment. The warmth below his sternum was there, steady. He pressed his hand to it briefly. Okay, he said. Can I go listen to the negotiations now? I want to know what they're deciding. Dumbledore blinked again. Then he laughed, an actual laugh, surprised out of him. Yes, he said. I suppose you should. The negotiations had reached the practical stage, which was considerably more interesting than the jurisdictional stage. Harry slipped into the front room and settled into a chair near the window with the unobtrusive skill he'd spent 6 years developing, and nobody told him to leave because he belonged here, and everyone present, including him, was beginning to understand that. The central issue was education and training. The bond, as Advocate Beaumont explained in crisp, detailed French that Fleur translated in a murmur near Harry's ear, produced certain side effects in the carrier that required management. Not in the sense of suppression, never suppression, Advocate Beaumont made this very clear, and the French officials nodded in the way of people reinforcing a deeply held principle, but in the sense of understanding. The Fujimo enhanced the carrier's existing magical core. How much depended on the carrier? In Harry's case, given what his magical core already was, this enhancement was significant, said Celeste, which was the first word she'd said since the meeting resumed and which produced a respectful quiet. How significant? Madame Bones asked. Celeste looked at Harry. May I? Harry had no idea what she was asking permission for, but she was asking, which earned an automatic yes. Sure. She crossed to him and held out one hand, palm up. Harry put his hand in hers, and she turned it over and held her own wand, an ancient thing, dark wood, faintly luminous, near his palm without touching. The wand glowed. Not faintly. Immediately, intensely, with a warm gold-white light that was the same color as the brand pulse yesterday, and Celeste's eyebrows rose by a fraction, the fraction representing considerable surprise on her scale. Well, she said. What is it? Harry asked, looking at the light with interest. The brand has accelerated your core's development substantially. She lowered her wand. The light faded. You have the magic of someone considerably older. Not in control, control takes years. But in raw capacity. She was looking at him with those sharp dark eyes. You have been using magic. Sometimes things happen, Harry said carefully. Uncontrolled? I couldn't control it, no. That will change. She was still looking at him. When did things start happening? Harry thought about it. Always. Mostly when I was scared or angry. Sometimes when I really wanted something. He paused. One time I spoke to a snake. The room processed this. Parseltongue, Dumbledore said quietly, from the doorway where he'd appeared. A rare gift, Harry. And not one to worry about. He paused. Not inherently. My father couldn't do it, Harry said. Could he? No. But Voldemort. He could. Yes. Harry turned this over. He'd known, from Dumbledore's explanation, that the night in Godric's Hollow had involved a transfer of something. He was working out the logistics. So it came from him. Into me. When the curse bounced. Dumbledore's expression was very careful. That is a reasonable theory. Is it wrong? No. Harry nodded. He tucked this away too, adding it to the growing archive of important things, and looked around the room. So what's the plan for training? Advocate Beaumont looked slightly startled by the directness. Madame Bones looked like she was recalibrating. Apollon looked like someone watching something she'd hoped for. The preliminary proposal, Advocate Beaumont said, recovering smoothly, is that the bond requires proximity, and that separation from the bonded pair for extended periods during the critical early phase causes, not pain, but a kind of dissonance. An unsettled quality in all three parties. She paused. Given this, and given the provisional sanctuary arrangement, it is the recommendation of the French ministry that Mr. Potter reside with the Delacour family for the 30-day provisional period, with structured access for the British ministry and for Monsieur Dumbledore. Structured access, Dumbledore repeated. Supervised visits, Advocate Beaumont clarified pleasantly. To ensure continuity of relationship while the Wizengamot prepares for the custody determination. Supervised, Dumbledore said again, with the controlled neutrality of a man deciding whether to argue. Supervised, Celeste confirmed, looking at him with the serene authority of someone who has already won and is simply waiting for the paperwork. Not because you cannot be trusted, Albus. Because this is the protocol, and this child deserves the protocol to be followed for him, not around him. Dumbledore looked at Harry. Harry met his eyes and said nothing. Very well, Dumbledore said. They left the following morning. The Delacour's home was in the south of France, not Paris, not the glamorous coast, but the inland hills above Provence where the lavender grew in long silver-purple rows and the villages were the color of old honey and the air smelled like thyme and heat. The house sat on a hillside with a view that went all the way to the horizon, a sprawling, beautiful thing of pale stone and terracotta tiles with a garden that appeared to have been winning an argument with the house for several decades about who was really in charge. Harry stood at the gate and looked at it. It's called La Maison de Flammes, Fleur said beside him, with the slightly self-conscious tone of someone presenting something they love and hoping you'll love it too. The House of Flames, Harry said. Fleur looked at him. You speak French? No. But Flames is close enough to figure out. He kept looking at the house. The garden was riotous, roses climbing the walls, lavender in thick bunches, a wisteria that had entirely consumed a section of the southern wall and appeared proud of itself. It's beautiful. It is home, Fleur said, and her voice had no self-consciousness in it now, just simple truth. The inside was warm and slightly chaotic in the way of houses that are actually lived in, books stacked on the stairs, a tabby cat asleep on a coat rack, the smell of something cooking that turned out to be Jacques at the stove making something with garlic and tomatoes and fresh herbs that filled the whole downstairs with the particular comfort of a meal being made by someone who means it. Harry stood in the kitchen doorway and watched Jacques cook. Jacques noticed him after a moment and smiled. You like cooking? I know how to cook, Harry said. I used to do most of it at home. The spatula paused in Jacques' hand. Just briefly. How long have you been cooking? Since I was about 4, I think. When I could reach the hob with a step. The spatula resumed. Jacques' voice was very steady. Well. You can cook here too, if you want. I enjoy company. He glanced over. But you don't have to. There is no have to in this house except the obvious things. What are the obvious things? Don't be unkind to people who cannot defend themselves. Don't be dishonest when honesty is available. Eat dinner. He paused, considering. And if the cat sits on your feet, you wait until she moves. You do not disturb the cat. Harry looked at the tabby, which had relocated from the coat rack to a patch of sunlight on the kitchen floor and was in the process of becoming a liquid. What's her name? Cendrillon, Jacques said. Gabrielle named her. It means Cinderella. He added the garlic to the pan and the smell intensified beautifully. She is not remotely like Cinderella. She is imperious and selfish and very warm in winter. Harry looked at Cendrillon. Cendrillon opened one eye, assessed him with the particular judgment of a cat that has decided to be honest, and closed it again. I think she likes me, Harry said. She did not hiss, Jacques confirmed. This is as good as it gets. Celeste had come with them. Her main residence was Paris, but she spent summers in Provence, which Harry gathered was a tradition that predated living memory and was not something the weather got to have an opinion about. She occupied a set of rooms at the east end of the house with a private garden that she tended herself, and she spent the first 2 days watching Harry with those sharp eyes while appearing not to. On the third day, she called him to her garden. It was 7 in the morning. The lavender was silver with dew and the light was the long, amber kind that only exists in the hour after sunrise, and Celeste was sitting in a stone chair with her tea and her walking stick and an expression that said she had been up for some time. Sit, she said, gesturing to the opposite chair. Harry sat. I am going to teach you something, she said. Not magic. Not spells. Before spells, there is something that spells come from. She looked at him over her tea. Do you understand what I mean? Like, the source of it? Close enough. She set her cup down. Magic is not a tool. People who treat it as a tool use it poorly and are surprised when it turns. Magic is a relationship. Between you and the force that moves through you. Between you and the world. She tilted her head. The Fujimo has changed your relationship with that force. Your magic is not the same as it was 4 days ago. Harry pressed his hand to his chest. The brand was there, warm and present. It feels bigger. It is bigger. The question is whether you are big enough to carry it. She looked at him. Not physically. In here. She tapped her chest, the same gesture he'd seen Fleur make. The fire only destroys what is too small to hold it. The work is becoming large enough. How do I do that? By doing. She stood up, smoothly, the walking stick unused. Come. We will start with the simplest thing. The simplest thing turned out to be sitting still. Not meditation in any formal sense. Celeste had no patience for formal ceremony where informal practice would do. It was simply sitting in the garden, feeling the magic the way you feel temperature, not grabbing at it, not pushing it, just noticing where it was and what it was doing. Celeste sat across from him and watched without commenting, and Harry sat and felt the warmth below his sternum and the larger warmth that moved through him like weather, and after about 20 minutes he opened his eyes and said, "It moves in patterns." "Yes," Celeste said. "Like it has like breathing. In and out." The ancients called it the tidal quality. The Veela knew it long before anyone put theory around it. She was watching him with an expression he was learning to read, not quite approval, but a satisfaction with what she was seeing. "You felt it on the first attempt. Most people take weeks. Is that because of the brand?" "Partly. Also because you have been living quietly for 6 years without anyone teaching you to make noise." She said this without particular inflection, but it landed with weight. Quiet children learn to listen. Listening is the first skill. Fleur found them there an hour later, coming through the garden gate with her hair loose and a book under her arm and the expression of someone who had intended to read in the garden and was now recalibrating. She looked at Harry, then at Celeste, then back at Harry. "You're teaching him," she said to her great-grandmother. "Observant," Celeste said. "Can I watch?" "You can participate." Celeste gestured to the third stone chair that Harry had not noticed until this moment. "Sit. What I am teaching him applies to you as well." Fleur sat. She set her book on the ground and crossed her legs and arranged herself with the slightly effortful neatness of someone trying to look like they were not trying. She glanced at Harry. Harry glanced back. "Both of you," Celeste said, "close your eyes." They closed their eyes. "Now feel the magic. Not as yours. Not as something you possess. As something that moves through you." Her voice was low and even. "Like water through a channel. You are the channel. Not the water." Harry found the rhythm he'd found before, the tidal quality, in and out, warm through his chest and down his arms and into his hands. He heard Fleur's breathing beside him, and then something else, a warmth from her direction that wasn't the air temperature, that was familiar in the specific way the brand was familiar, like a musical note he recognized. "Oh," he said softly, and then felt self-conscious. "What?" Fleur said, and she said it too quickly to have not felt something similar. Can you feel mine?" A pause. "Yes. I have been, yes. Since yesterday, actually. I thought I was imagining it." "You were not," Fleur said, with the tone of someone who had been telling herself the same thing. Celeste opened her eyes and looked at them both with an expression that she very quickly returned to neutral, but not before Harry caught what was underneath it. She had expected this, he understood. She had sat them here together precisely because she expected this. "The bond conducts," she said. "As you develop your sensitivity to your own magic, you develop it to each other's. This is, not something to manage. It is something to learn to read." She looked at Harry. "Her fire. Your fire. They are not the same fire. But they are the same family of fire. You will learn the difference." "What about Gabrielle?" Harry asked. Celeste looked slightly surprised. "You feel hers too?" "It's quieter. Warmer. Less," he searched. "Less directional. Gabrielle's bond is different from Fleur's. Fleur's is fierce and immediate. Gabrielle's is," Celeste paused, choosing. "Gabrielle's is certain. It does not push. It waits. It is the fire that outlasts the storm, not the fire that is the storm." Fleur, who was listening with her eyes still closed, said, "She always knew. Even before it happened. She talked about the boy for months. We thought she meant a friend at school." "She knew," Celeste said simply. "Some Veela see the bond before it forms. Very rare. Very young Gabrielle is unusual." As if summoned, Gabrielle appeared at the garden gate in her usual state of calm, self-possessed arrival, today wearing a yellow dress and carrying Lapin under her arm. She surveyed the garden, identified what was happening, and came to sit cross-legged on the stone path beside Harry's chair with the easy confidence of someone who belongs wherever she sits. She closed her own eyes. Celeste looked at her great-granddaughter for a moment. Then looked at Harry. Then at Fleur. The three of them, in the morning garden in the amber light, quiet and warm and learning the shape of what they were. Celeste picked up her tea. It had gone cold. She drank it anyway. "Good," she said. The days in Provence had a rhythm that Harry found himself inside of before he'd realized it had happened. Mornings with Celeste in the garden, the lessons expanding from feeling to directing, from directing to small, deliberate acts of will, and Harry's magic responded to all of it with an enthusiasm that occasionally overshot the intention and once lit the lavender on fire, which Celeste extinguished without comment and then said, smaller, which was apparently all the feedback that was needed. Afternoons were less structured. Fleur had readings she was doing for school in September and did it with the focus and irritation of someone who is very good at school and is annoyed that she still has to do homework during something this significant. Harry sat near her sometimes and she showed him things in her books, not teaching, exactly, more like thinking out loud, and Harry absorbed it with the quick, hungry attention of someone who has always wanted to learn and has never been given material. Gabrielle spent her afternoons as she spent everything, entirely in her own terms. She built something elaborate in the garden out of sticks and stones that she would not explain. She had long conversations with Cinderlin in what appeared to be her own language, which the cat participated in with apparent seriousness. She dragged Harry to inspect a beetle she'd found and informed him, via Fleur's translation, that it was the most important beetle in Provence, and Harry inspected it gravely and agreed. He was getting better at French. Not conversational, not yet, but he could follow the direction of things. The warm, rapid sound of the language was becoming familiar in the way that a background becomes part of the picture. Jacques taught him to make bread on the 5th day. Not as a lesson, as a morning activity, hands in dough, flour on the kitchen table, Cinderlin watching from the windowsill with her front paws folded and her tail around them in the posture of a cat sitting in judgment of bread. "You have good hands for it," Jacques said, watching Harry's kneading. "The healer said I was underweight," Harry said. He said it without self-pity, just noting it. "The healer was correct," Jacques said. "We are addressing that." "I've eaten more in 5 days than I usually eat in 2 weeks, Harry said. Jacques' hands paused in the dough. "I'm not complaining," Harry added. "I'm just," he tried to find the right word. "Noticing." "Noticing is important," Jacques said. "Noticing is how you know that things have changed." He resumed kneading. "You are allowed to notice that things are better, Harry. You are allowed to let them be better. You do not have to," he seemed to be choosing words carefully. "You do not have to hold yourself at a distance from good things in case they stop." Harry was quiet for a moment, working the dough. "How do you know I'm doing that?" "Because I would be," Jacques said simply. "If I were you, at your age, I would be waiting for the floor to drop." He glanced over. "Is the floor dropping?" Harry felt the warmth below his sternum. Thought about the morning garden. The amber light. The bread. "No," he said. "No," Jacques agreed. "It is not." Dumbledore arrived on the 8th day, as arranged, via the flue in the living room. He came with a leather case of books, some of which were for Harry, which he delivered with the air of someone making a gesture of good faith, and sat in the garden with Apollon for 2 hours in what was clearly a careful, complex conversation that neither of them was rushing. Harry didn't try to listen in. He sat with Fleur on the terrace above the garden and read one of the books Dumbledore had brought, which was a history of magical Britain that had never been on any Muggle school curriculum and which filled in about 30 more pieces of the picture. "Do you trust him?" Fleur asked, without looking up from her own book. "Dumbledore?" "Yes." Harry thought about it seriously. "Not completely. But not because he's bad." He paused. "Because he's the kind of person who has a plan for everything and the plan is always the most important thing in the room. Even when the plan stops making sense." Fleur looked at him over her book. "That is a very exact reading for someone who met him a week ago." "I've been reading people my whole life," Harry said. "I had to." Fleur was quiet for a moment. "The Dursleys. Mostly. But everyone, really. If you can't predict what people are going to do, things go badly." He turned a page. "Dumbledore's easy to predict. He'll do what he thinks is right, but right for him is connected to his plan, and his plan is very large and very long and has a lot of people in it who don't know they're in it." He looked at the garden, where Dumbledore was talking with Apollon with the careful attention of someone who has decided to listen more than he speaks. "He'll eventually do what's best for me. But it'll be because it fits with everything else." "And Maman?" Harry looked at the garden again. Apollone's posture, straight, focused, every inch of her present in the conversation, and the way she'd looked at him on that first night when he'd asked if he had to go back, and the glass of milk and the biscuits, and what is his favorite food. "She'll do what's best for me," Harry said, "because she just will." Fleur made a small sound. She looked back at her book, but not really reading. "I feel it too," Harry said, because she was his bond and he was getting better at reading the texture of her silence. "What you're feeling right now." Her hand tightened slightly on her book. "What am I feeling?" Like you were already loyal to him before you knew him and now you know him a little and the loyalty is bigger and it's too much feeling to just sit with." He said it matter-of-factly, without making it more than what it was. Fleur was quiet for a long moment. "I am 11, she said, "and you are 6, and you have no business being that perceptive." "Sorry." "Don't apologize." She turned a page that she hadn't finished reading. "You're right. It is too much." She paused. "Is it like that for you?" "Does the bond, it's there," Harry said. "All the time. Like, you know how if you've had music playing and then it stops, you can still hear it? It's like that. The absence of it would be the loud thing." Fleur pressed her lips together and stared at her book with tremendous focus. "Fleur," he said. "What?" "I'm not going anywhere." She was very still. "I mean, I don't know what this all looks like yet. The hearing, or where I'll be, or any of it. But the bond is there regardless. Right?" He looked at her. "So you don't have to worry about, I'm not going to pretend it isn't there to make things less complicated." Fleur turned to look at him. 11 years old, with those impossible cheekbones and silver blonde hair and the fierce, helpless expression she wore when the bond was pulling at her and she was deciding whether to let it. She looked at him for a moment that was longer than comfortable and shorter than she wanted. "How are you 6, she said. "I'll be 7 in January." "That is not what I meant." "I know," Harry said. And grinned. Fleur made an exasperated sound and went back to her book, but the set of her shoulders had loosened, the tension gone out of them, and she was actually reading now. The letter from the British ministry arrived on the 9th day. Apollon brought it to the breakfast table with her coffee and read it with the contained expression she wore when she was deciding how to deliver news. Harry watched her face and read the news from her face before she said a word. "The Wizengamot hearing has been set," she said. 23 days from now. "Is that fast?" Harry asked. "Extremely. Someone has pushed for it." She looked at Celeste, who was spreading jam on toast with the serenity of someone who has made a few calls. Celeste spread more jam. "The hearing will be full," Apollon continued. "Not a private chamber session. They want it in the full Wizengamot." She looked at Harry. "This is unusual. It suggests that some members want it public." "Why would they want it public?" "Because public hearings produce public records," Celeste said, "which are harder to alter after the fact. Someone wants this properly documented." She took a bite of toast. "It is the correct instinct. The Wizengamot hasn't had a full session over a custody matter in," Apollon checked the letter. "Over 40 years. Not since the McKinnon case." "It's because of me specifically," Harry said. "Not as vanity. Just assessment. Not the bond. They want to look at me." "Yes," Apollon said. "They want to know what the boy who lived has become. What he is." She set the letter down. "And they will attempt to use the hearing to reclaim leverage on your future." Harry thought about sitting in the full Wizengamot. About being the thing in the room that everyone was looking at and making decisions about. He thought about the corridor at the stadium, how he'd stood in the center of everything and watched it all clearly. "Can I speak at the hearing?" he asked. Apollon looked at Advocate Beaumont, who had appeared in the doorway with her own coffee and an expression that said she'd already been thinking about this. Under Wizengamot rules, a minor can address the chamber if the presiding Wizengamot head permits it and an adult speaks on the minor's behalf first. She paused. You would need someone to introduce you. Dumbledore would do it, Harry said. Silence. You think Dumbledore would introduce you at your own custody hearing, Apollon said carefully. I think if I ask him directly, he will, Harry said. Because he feels guilty. And because he actually believes in me, somewhere under all the planning. He met Apollon's eyes. He'd rather I was eloquent in front of the Wizengamot than managed around it. He knows I can do it. Advocate Beaumont was writing something. Rapidly. Apollon looked at her son, no, her son-in-law, Jacques, who had come in with fresh coffee and caught the last of the conversation, and then back at Harry. You are 6 years old, she said. Nearly 7, Harry said. Fleur, sitting across from him, put her face in her hands. But her shoulders were shaking with laughter. Mon Dieu, Gabrielle said, which were apparently the first French words Harry had taught her in English by accident, because she'd heard them at a significant moment and correctly identified them as generally applicable. Everyone looked at Gabrielle. Gabrielle ate her croissant. Outside the window, the lavender moved in a light wind off the hills, and the morning was warm and gold and ordinary, and Harry sat in the middle of it with the brand warm below his sternum and 3 French witches and 1 French wizard who were becoming, day by day, the shape of something he hadn't had a word for. He was beginning to have the word for it now. He just wasn't quite ready to say it out loud yet. Chapter 4, What the Fire Remembers. Rita Skeeter arrived on a Tuesday. Harry knew she was coming before she arrived because Celeste mentioned it at breakfast with the specific tone she used for things she found distasteful but inevitable, like cold rain or bad faith negotiations. There will be a reporter today, she said, over her coffee, from the British press. She has requested access and been denied. She will come anyway. How do you know she'll come anyway? Harry asked. Because she is Rita Skeeter, Celeste said, and Rita Skeeter has never in her professional life respected a denied access request. It is, in a way, her only consistent quality. She arrived at 9:10, operating to the lane outside the property boundary with the slightly theatrical pop of someone who wants to be heard arriving, and walked up to the gate in robes of acid green that Harry could see from the terrace where he was doing his morning practice. She had a quick quotes quill behind her ear and a photographer behind her and the expression of a woman who had already written the first 3 paragraphs of her article. Apollon intercepted her at the gate with the smooth certainty of someone who had prepared for this. Harry watched from the terrace. He was sitting cross-legged on the warm stone with his hands in his lap, and he'd been in the middle of something Celeste called directed flow, pushing his magic deliberately through a specific intention rather than letting it move on its own. But the arrival below had interrupted his concentration and now he was simply watching. She's very green, he said. She thinks it suits her, Fleur said, from the chair behind him where she was reading. It does not suit her. Below, Apollon was speaking to Skeeter with the particular clarity of someone choosing every word to be quotable and entirely uncontestable. Skeeter was smiling the smile of someone who is being told no and is already deciding how to make the no into a yes or at least into a better story than a yes would have been. What does she want? Harry asked. An interview. Pictures. Your face on the front page with a headline she's already written. Fleur set her book down. She will write about you regardless of whether she gets access. This is what she does. What will she write if she doesn't talk to me? Speculation. Unnamed sources. Something about whether the Veela bond is manipulative or whether you are being kept away from your rightful magical guardian or, Fleur paused, and the pause had an edge. Or something about whether a 6-year-old boy has been claimed by a foreign magical family, with all the implications that word carries. Harry looked down at the gate. Skeeter was still smiling. Apollon was still standing exactly where she'd been. Neither of them had moved. She'll make it sound sinister, Harry said. That is her talent. He thought about it for a moment. Let her in. Fleur turned to look at him. "Let her in," he said again. "Let her talk to me." "Harry, Fleur." He turned to look at her directly. "She's going to write something. If she talks to me, she writes what I give her. If she doesn't, she writes what she invents." He held Fleur's gaze. "I'm not afraid of her. And I'm not going to hide in a garden in Provence while someone in London decides what my story is." Fleur looked at him for a long moment with the expression she wore when he said something she disagreed with on instinct but couldn't actually argue against. "Grandmere will want to be present," she said. "Grandmere should be present," he agreed. "She'll enjoy it." Fleur made a sound that was not quite a laugh, turned in her chair, and called toward the house in French. Celeste appeared in the terrace doorway 3 minutes later with her coffee cup and her walking stick and an expression of alert interest that she was making no effort to conceal. "He wants to speak with Skeeter," Fleur said. Celeste looked at Harry. "She's going to write about me either way," Harry said. "I'd rather she wrote something true." Celeste looked at him for another moment. Then she looked at the gate below, where Apollon and Skeeter were still in their careful standoff, and something in her face shifted from alert interest to something more like anticipation. "Tell Apollon," she said, "to let her in." The garden table was set with 2 extra chairs and morning coffee and the specific territorial arrangement of a family that has decided this is their ground and is not pretending otherwise. Skeeter arrived at it with her quick quotes quill already out, her photographer hanging back at a respectful distance that suggested Apollon had communicated terms, and her professional smile firmly in place. She took in the scene, Apollon on one side, Celeste on the other, Fleur in a chair slightly behind Harry, Gabrielle on the garden path making no pretense of doing anything except watching, and recalibrated slightly. Harry saw her do it. She was good at reading rooms too, he noted. She was just using the skill differently than he used it. "Harry Potter," she said, sitting down across from him, and the warmth in her voice was manufactured but not entirely, there was genuine excitement underneath it, the excitement of someone who has found the story of the decade in a garden in Provence. "My goodness. You're quite something." "Hello," Harry said. "Rita Skeeter, Daily Prophet." She extended a hand. He shook it. Her grip was firm and assessing. "I appreciate you agreeing to speak with me." "I have conditions," Harry said. Skeeter blinked. "I'm sorry." "Conditions." "For the interview." He looked at her directly. "The quick quotes quill doesn't run during our conversation. You write what I actually say." Skeeter's smile didn't falter but something behind it recalculated. "The quill is simply a recording, I know what it does," Harry said. "Fleur told me." He didn't look at Fleur. He kept his eyes on Skeeter. "No quill. You can take notes yourself. And before you print anything, Advocate Beaumont reviews it for factual accuracy. That's not standard practice, those are my conditions." A pause. Skeeter looked at Apollon, who was watching her coffee cup with great interest. She looked at Celeste, who met her eyes with the serene authority of a woman who had outlasted 7 political administrations and 3 wars. The quill went behind the ear. Skeeter produced a notepad. "You're 6 years old," she said, and now the warmth was gone and what replaced it was more honest, a sharp, professional appraisal. She was better like this, Harry thought. "Where did you learn to negotiate?" "I've been watching adults make deals my whole life," Harry said. "You learn patterns." "At the Dursleys." "Yes." Skeeter's quill, the manual one, moved. "Can you tell me about life there?" "You can ask specific questions," Harry said. "I'll tell you what's true." She asked. He answered. He did not perform it, did not make it dramatic or pitiable or anything other than accurate. The shoes, the room, the cooking, the food. He said it all in the same tone he said everything, and he watched Skeeter's face as he did and saw something interesting happen to it, the performance slipped. The professional warmth and the manufactured concern gave way to something that was just a journalist listening to something that mattered, and she was writing quickly, accurately, without flourish. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, after a few minutes. "Because it's true," Harry said. "And because if people know what happened, they can think about whether they want it to keep happening to other people." Skeeter looked at him. "To other children, you mean? Like you? Magical children placed with Muggle families who weren't told anything and weren't checked on." He kept his voice level. "Yes. She wrote that down." "The bond," she said, after a moment. "The Fujimo. Can you describe what it felt like?" "Warm," Harry said. "Like standing in sunlight. Like something that had always been missing had a shape now." He paused. "Not frightening. I was not taken advantage of by the Delacour family. I know that is probably one of the things people are wondering." Skeeter's quill paused. "I'm 6, he said. Not unintelligent. I know some people will read about this and worry about a powerful magical family and a defenseless child. So I'm telling you." Apollon asked what I wanted on the first night. Jacques asked what I wanted to eat for breakfast. Celeste asked me what I thought before she taught me anything. He looked at Skeeter steadily. "What they have given me is the first place I've lived where someone asked what I needed." Skeeter wrote for a long time after he said that. At the end of the interview, which ran for 40 minutes and produced more actual content than Skeeter had expected to get in 2 hours, she closed her notepad and looked at Harry with an expression he hadn't seen from her yet. Unguarded. Something almost like respect, or the closest thing to it that lived in the same neighborhood as her usual approach. "You know," she said, "I've interviewed the minister, 3 heads of Hogwarts departments, and a Norwegian dragon tamer who was considerably less articulate than you." "Was the dragon tamer interesting?" Harry asked. Skeeter blinked. Then laughed, short and genuine. "Yes, actually. Different kind of interesting." She left with her photographer and her notepad full of actual quotations and something that Harry thought might be a slightly complicated conscience. Apollon watched her go from the gate, then turned back to the garden table. "That was either very clever or very dangerous," she said. "Both, probably," Harry said. "Both," Apollon agreed, sitting down. She looked at him with that expression, the one that wasn't the diplomatic mask or the fierce matriarch but just the woman underneath both of those. "You know she may not honor the conditions. She might not. But she'll know that if she doesn't, I'll say publicly that she didn't, and the interview she got is better than anything she'd invent, so she has more to lose by lying than by telling the truth for once." Apollon looked at Celeste. Celeste drank her coffee. "The hearing is in 2 weeks, Apollon said. Harry. The Wizengamot will be, it will not all be sympathetic. There are people on that body who have very specific ideas about what you should be and where you should be and who should have access to you. Because of the prophecy," Harry said. Apollon paused. "You know about the prophecy. Dumbledore told me. When we talked." He looked at his hands. "I've been thinking about it. And it says I'm the one who has to deal with Voldemort eventually." He said the name clearly, no hesitation, and Apollon controlled a reaction. "But it doesn't say anything about how I get there or who I get there with. It says power, that I'll have a power he doesn't know about." He looked up. "What do you think that is?" Apollon was quiet. Celeste set her cup down. "What do you think it is?" Harry pressed his hand to his chest. "To the brand." "This," he said. "Not the brand itself. But what it means. He doesn't know what this is. He doesn't know what belonging feels like." He paused. "Love. My mum. Love that you choose over yourself. He doesn't understand that and he can't learn it." He looked at Celeste. "Is that right?" "Yes," Celeste said simply. "So me being here," Harry said, isn't running away from the prophecy. It's the prophecy. Apollon made a sound that was very small and very controlled. She reached across the table and put her hand over Harry's, briefly. He let her. The lessons with Celeste intensified in the second week. Morning sessions had moved from feeling and directing to actual controlled practice, and Harry threw himself into it with a focus that Celeste called, on the third day of the second week, alarming in the best possible sense. He learned quickly, faster than he should have, technically, for someone his age without a wand, and Celeste explained this without surprise. The brand had connected his magic to two other fires, and fire feeds fire. What Fleur and Gabrielle carried made him more efficient. Not more powerful. He was already that. More efficient, more able to direct what he had without burning the edges. The lavender caught fire twice more. On the fourth occasion it was deliberate. "Show me again," Celeste said, standing 6 feet back, arms folded. Harry looked at the lavender bush. He felt the magic, the tidal rhythm, in and out, and he pushed a single thread of it outward, a thin, directed thing, and touched the tip of the nearest stem. The flame was small and gold-white and exactly as big as he intended. Celeste looked at it. "Now stop it." He drew the thread back. The flame went out cleanly, no smoke, no damage. "Again," she said. "But this time, don't draw it back. Transform it." "Transform it into what?" "Light. Not fire. The same energy, different form." Harry tried. The flame shuddered, went briefly violet, became for 1 second a genuine sphere of cold light that hung in the air like a small moon, and then collapsed. "Closer," Celeste said. "It wants to be fire," Harry said, frustrated. "Your magic wants to be fire. That is its nature and its preference. Transformation requires will." She tilted her head. "Your will is strong. But you are defaulting to what is natural because it is easier. Stop making things easy for yourself." Harry looked at the lavender bush. Tried again. The sphere held for 3 seconds before it collapsed. "Better," Celeste said, and better from Celeste had the weight of a standing ovation from anyone else. Fleur watched the afternoon sessions when she wasn't studying. She sat on the garden wall with her book and watched with the focused attention of someone simultaneously trying to appear casual. On the 5th day of the second week, Celeste turned to her mid-session and said, "Are you going to observe all week or are you going to participate?" Fleur closed her book. "I'm participating." "Then get down from the wall." What followed was the most educational 2 hours Harry had experienced yet, because working with Fleur was different from working alone. The bond conducted between them and the magic amplified through that connection in ways that neither of them had quite expected. When they worked in the same direction, the output was substantially beyond what either produced separately, which Celeste observed with nods and occasional adjustments. When they worked against each other, which she made them do once, as an experiment, the resistance produced a field of visible magical tension that made the lavender bend away from them and the terrace stones hum. "Never work against each other," Celeste said, watching the last of the tension dissipate. "Not because you cannot sustain it. But because there is no point where it becomes worth the cost." "What if we disagree?" Fleur asked. "You will disagree constantly. You are very different people." Celeste looked at Harry, then at Fleur. "The bond is not an agreement. It is a connection. Connection survives disagreement. It survives poorly chosen words and bad days and different priorities." She paused. "What it does not survive is contempt. If you ever find contempt entering your relationship with each other, address it immediately and without waiting for the right moment." Harry thought about this. How do you know if you have contempt for someone versus just being angry at them? Celeste looked at him. Anger sees a person and wants them to be better. Contempt has stopped seeing a person. She paused. "You will not struggle with this. I am not worried about you." She looked at Fleur. "You I am slightly worried about." Your anger runs hot and sometimes burns past its intention. Fleur opened her mouth. Closed it. Said, with the conciseness of someone acknowledging a fair point against their will, yes. Gabrielle, who had been sitting on the garden path building something with stones and appeared to be paying no attention whatsoever, said, without looking up, "C'est vrai, Fleur. It's true, Fleur." "Thank you, Gabrielle," Fleur said, with the tone of a person who did not require that confirmation. Gabrielle placed a stone with great precision and said nothing further. Harry's magic produced its first genuine surprise on day 11. He was alone in the garden at dawn. Early rising had become natural, the sun coming up over the hills in that particular Provençal way that made the air smell like warm stone, doing the tidal exercise, feeling the rhythm, when something moved through the connection he shared with both sisters. Not an emotion, exactly. A texture. Something from Gabrielle's direction, the warm, certain thread that he'd learned to distinguish from Fleur's fiercer one, and it was urgent. Not fearful. But pressing. He was at the door of the sisters' room before he'd consciously decided to move. He knocked. "Gabrielle?" A pause. Then her voice, slightly breathless, "Oui." He opened the door. She was sitting up in her bed in the grey pre-dawn light with her eyes very wide and lapin clutched to her chest and the expression of someone who has woken from something vivid and not yet fully left it. Fleur was already sitting up on her side, which meant she'd felt it too. "What was it?" Harry asked, coming to sit on the edge of Gabrielle's bed. Gabrielle looked at him. Then she said something in French, slowly, the way she spoke when she was being precise. Fleur translated. "She says she saw the fire. The original fire. Not the brand, earlier. Where the bond comes from. She was watching her sister. She says she saw where we three began." "Began when?" Harry asked. Gabrielle spoke again. "Before," Fleur said. "She says before everything we know. Before this life." Fleur's voice had changed, quieter, careful. "She says the fire has always had 3 points. And it always finds its way back." Harry sat with this. The dawn was coming in through the curtains in long grey lines. "Does she know what to do with it?" he asked. Fleur asked Gabrielle. Gabrielle considered this question seriously, then answered. "She says she already knew what to do with it," Fleur said. "She says she just wanted us to know too." Gabrielle looked at Harry with those serious grey eyes and nodded once, the nod of a person who has delivered important information and is satisfied with how it was received. Harry nodded back. He sat with them until the sun came fully up, Gabrielle's small warm presence on one side, Fleur's fiercer warmth on the other, and outside the window the hills were going gold in the morning light, and the lavender was silver-tipped with dew, and the fire was warm below his sternum and it had been warm there for 11 days and he could no longer remember exactly what it felt like when it wasn't. He didn't try to remember. The letter from Dumbledore arrived on day 12. It was longer than his usual correspondence. Dumbledore wrote to Harry twice a week, which Harry had initially been surprised by and then understood as part of the careful work of being present without being controlling, which was something Dumbledore was learning how to do, imperfectly and with effort. This letter was different in quality from the earlier ones. Less managed. "Harry," it began, without preamble. "The Wizengamot session has generated more attention than I anticipated. Several members have sent correspondence requesting assurances about your magical education and your connections to, as they put it, British magical traditions. There is some concern, not entirely without basis, that your development is occurring outside British institutional frameworks. I am not writing to pressure you. I am writing because I think you deserve to know what is being said, so that nothing surprises you at the hearing. Lord Knott has requested standing to speak at the session. He will argue that the Veela bond represents an undue foreign influence on a British magical national of significant prophetic importance. He is not alone in this view, though most who share it are more politic about saying so. I will introduce you, as you asked. I would ask only that you let me know what you intend to say, not so that I can manage it, but because I think you will want someone in that room to know your intentions clearly before you begin. I believe in you, Harry. I want to be honest with you, I have not always shown that belief in the right ways. I intend to keep trying. Yours sincerely, Albus Dumbledore. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it and looked at the view from the terrace, the long hills, the lavender rose, the sky that went on and on. Lord Not, he said to Fleur, who was nearby. Old family. Pure blood. Was never confirmed as a Death Eater, but the question has been raised. Fleur's voice was level. He has 3 seats on the Wizengamot through family inheritance. He is exactly the kind of person who would argue that a 6-year-old child is a national asset rather than a person. What does he actually want? Influence, Fleur said. Over you. Over the people around you. A child who owes the Wizengamot his guardianship is a child who can be shaped. She paused. A child who comes into the Wizengamot with the Fujimo and a French magical family and a great-grandmother who has appeared before the ICW cannot be shaped. This frightens people like Not. Harry looked at Dumbledore's letter. At the line, I believe in you, Harry. What do pure-blood families actually think about Voldemort? He asked. Not naively, he'd been reading, assembling the picture. The ones who supported him. What did they think they were getting? Fleur was quiet for a moment. Power. Protection. The preservation of a world where their position was guaranteed by blood rather than merit. And he's gone, mostly, and now they need a new thing to organize around. Yes. And I'm convenient, Harry said. If they can get close to me. If they can own you, Fleur said. Yes. Harry stood up from the terrace chair. He walked to the railing and looked down at the garden, at Gabrielle below, quietly conducting what appeared to be a complex negotiation with Cinderlin over the ownership of a sunny patch of stone, and felt the warmth of the brand and the tidal rhythm of his own magic and the clarity that came from 11 days of learning to listen to both. I need to write back to Dumbledore, he said. And I need Celeste to help me understand how the Wizengamot chamber actually works. The seating, the speaking rules, which families hold which seats. He looked at Fleur. And I need you to help me understand the politics. Who's aligned with who? Who actually wants what's good and who wants what's useful? Fleur looked at him. I know it's a lot of reading, he said. I like reading, she said immediately. I know. She got up and went inside, already pulling her thinking face, the focused, slightly narrowed expression she wore when her brain had found a project. Harry watched her go, and the brand was warm with something that was hers, something that was pride or purpose or the specific satisfaction of being good at something that matters. He felt it. He let it be good. He went inside to write to Dumbledore. The letter he wrote was 3 paragraphs. He told Dumbledore what he intended to say at the hearing, not word for word, but the shape of it. That he was Harry Potter and he was 6 years old and he had been in the care of people who fed him properly for 12 days and that was new. That the bond was real and the Delacours were real and his magic was growing in ways that made sense for the first time because someone was actually teaching him. That he was not a national asset and not a chess piece in any plan and not a symbol that needed to be managed. That he was a person, and that persons, even small ones, have the right to be in rooms where their lives are being decided. He sealed the letter and gave it to the owl Jacques kept for correspondence, an even-tempered tawny named Auguste who received the letter with professional gravity and disappeared over the hills. Celeste spent the afternoon going through Wizengamot procedure with him. She did it at the garden table with a sheet of parchment that she drew a semicircle on, marking the seats and their occupants and their histories, and Harry sat across from her and absorbed it and asked questions and absorbed the answers, and by evening he had a cleaner picture of the chamber than most Hogwarts graduates. Madame Bones, he said, looking at the chart, holds the presiding chair for this session. She is honest, which is rarer than it should be. She will follow the rules. Celeste marked the seat. She will allow you to speak if Dumbledore introduces you. And Dumbledore himself. Where does he sit? Chief Warlock. She marked the high seat at the apex of the semicircle. He will chair the session jointly with Bones. He holds significant procedural power. She looked at Harry. He will use it for you, I believe. Whatever his complexities. Because he feels guilty, Harry said. Because he loves you, Celeste said, and said it plainly, the way she said everything true. Badly, and with too much planning, and in ways that missed the point. But genuinely. She looked at him steadily. You can accept a person's love and still hold them accountable for how they demonstrated it. These are not contradictory. Harry looked at the chart. Will I win? That depends on what winning means. Coming home with you. After the hearing. And the right to keep coming here. Celeste looked at the chart. Then at him. Yes, she said. I believe so. She paused. But it will not be clean. There will be compromise. Dumbledore will want some ongoing connection to your magical education. The British Ministry will want oversight. These things are not entirely unreasonable. She tilted her head. The question is whether the oversight comes with control. And that is what the hearing determines. She gathered the parchment. Which is why it matters how you conduct yourself in that chamber. She looked at him. Not how impressive you are. How true you are. There is a difference. I know, Harry said. I know you know. She stood up. That is why I am not worried. The night before the hearing, Fleur found Harry on the terrace at the same pre-dawn hour he'd been using for practice, but he wasn't practicing. He was sitting with his knees drawn up and his arms around them, looking at the hills. She sat beside him. Not too close. Just near. Ready? She asked. Yes. Are you nervous? He thought about it honestly. No. He paused. Should I be? Most people would be. I'm not most people, he said, and said it not as arrogance but as fact, with the simple clarity of someone who has spent 11 days learning exactly what they are. Fleur was quiet. The pre-dawn was very still, the hills black shapes against a dark blue sky, the lavender invisible but present in the smell of the air. What you said, she began carefully. At the hearing. About love being the power he doesn't know. Yes. You know that when you say it in that room, you are saying it to people who will write it down and argue about it and try to use it. Yes. And you're still going to say it. Yes, Harry said. Because it's true. And because true things are stronger when they're said in public. He looked at the horizon, where the black was beginning, very slightly, to go gray. Voldemort survived on secrets. On things that weren't said. On people being too afraid to name things clearly. He paused. I'm not doing that. Fleur looked at the same horizon. You know, she said quietly, when the brand happened, I was terrified. Not of you. Of it. Of feeling that much about someone I hadn't met. Of not being able to choose. She was looking at the hills. I am 11 and I have a mother and father and sister I love and I have my own plans for my own life, and then this enormous, ancient thing happened and I had no say in it. Harry waited. And then, Fleur said, I met you. And you were 6 years old and slightly too small and you asked whether the little phoenixes had come back. And I thought, she paused. I thought, oh. The bond knew what it was doing. The horizon was going pink now. Just at the edge. It's not romantic, Harry said, because clarity mattered. No. It's not romantic. Fleur smiled, not the diplomatic one, not the proud one, just a real smile in the early light. It's much bigger than that. Harry looked at the pink edge of the sky. "It's family," he said. "It's the first one I've had." Fleur said nothing. But she moved fractionally closer, and the warmth of the bond was there between them, and the pink at the horizon spread slowly into gold, and the lavender caught it and became, for a moment, the color of fire. "Come on," Harry said, getting up. "We should wake Gabrielle." "She's already awake," Fleur said. He looked. Down in the garden, in the very first light, Gabrielle was sitting cross-legged on the stone path with Lapin in her lap, her face turned to the sunrise, absolutely still. She had been waiting. They went down to her. Chapter 5. The Wizengamot chamber was older than most of the ministry building around it, and it showed in the way that things which have been important for a very long time show their age, not decayed, but weighted, the stone darker and the air closer and the tiered seating arranged with the particular geometry of a room designed to make the person in the center feel appropriately small. Harry stood in the entrance corridor and looked at the doors. They were tall. Black oak, with silver hinges that had been polished so many times the metal had gone soft at the edges. From inside came the sound of people taking their seats, the shuffle and murmur of a full Wizengamot session, 80-odd witches and wizards with their robes and their histories and their various ideas about what today was supposed to produce. 83 members currently seated, Advocate Beaumont said, checking something on a parchment. She had been in preparation mode since the previous afternoon, which meant she spoke in declarative sentences and didn't make eye contact with anything that wasn't the parchment. The visitor gallery is full. Press credentials have been issued to 14 journalists. She paused. Skeeter is in the gallery. What did she print? Apollon asked. It ran this morning. Fleur had the paper. She'd been reading it in the ministry atrium while they waited and had said nothing about its contents, which meant it was either exactly right or something that required a controlled presentation. She handed it to Harry. He read it. The headline was, "The Boy in Two Big Shoes, Harry Potter Speaks." It was accurate. Every quotation was his. The tone was less sensational than he'd expected and more direct, and whoever had edited it at the Prophet had either left it alone or hadn't been fast enough to change it. The story led with the shoes, moved through his description of Privet Drive, included his explanation of the bond in his own words, and ended with, "What they have given me is the first place I've lived where someone asked what I needed." There was a photograph of the Delacour house. Not of Harry, no photographs of him, which had been one of Apollon's conditions. Just the house, pale stone and wisteria, the hills behind it. Something about the photograph was very quiet and very honest, and Harry stared at it for a moment. "Good," he said. Fleur looked like she wanted to say something and had decided against it. Apollon read it over Harry's shoulder, her expression moving through several stages and ending at satisfaction. "She kept the conditions," Harry said. This time, Celeste said, from behind them, which was all she said on the subject. Dumbledore appeared at the far end of the corridor, moving at his characteristic unhurried pace with his purple robes and his half-moon spectacles and the leather case of whatever he'd been working on. He stopped when he saw Harry. They looked at each other. "Good morning," Harry said. "Good morning, Harry." Dumbledore looked at him properly, the way he had in the Provence kitchen when he'd talked about James and Lily, the way that wasn't managing but just seeing. "The article is being discussed in the gallery." "I know. Several members have already changed their prepared positions based on it." "I know that too." Dumbledore's mouth curved slightly. "I read your letter," he said. "What you plan to say?" And I will introduce you," Dumbledore said. "Exactly as you asked." "Thank you." A pause. Dumbledore looked at Apollon, and the look was the complicated one, the one that acknowledged everything that had happened and didn't pretend it hadn't. "Apollon. Albus. He is ready," Dumbledore said. It was not quite what he'd meant to say, Harry could tell. What he meant was something more than ready, something he didn't have the right word for or wasn't ready to say aloud. "He is very ready." "I know," Apollon said. Her voice was not warm, but it was not cold. It was the voice of a woman who has not yet forgiven everything but is making space for the process. The doors opened. The Wizengamot chamber was a semicircle of rising stone benches that looked down on a central space where a single chair sat, and it was a chair designed with purpose, high-backed, dark, positioned so that whoever sat in it was below the level of the lowest bench and therefore looking up at 83 pairs of eyes. The chair had, in older times, contained chains. The chains were gone now, but the memory of them wasn't. It was in the design of the thing, the way it sat alone on that stone floor. Harry walked in. He sat in the chair. He looked up at the chamber. The sound of 83 people going quiet simultaneously was interesting. Not shocked, they'd known he was coming. But the specific quality of the quiet that descended when he sat was the quality of people recalibrating what they'd expected against what they were seeing. What they'd expected, Harry understood, was either a frightened child or a precociously confident child performing confidence. What they were seeing was a 6-year-old boy sitting in a very large chair and looking at them with straightforward, unruffled attention. He didn't perform calm. He just was calm. The chair was too big for him. His feet didn't reach the floor. He let this be true without adjusting, without swinging his feet or sitting forward on the edge the way a child might when trying to look bigger. He just sat. Madame Bones, at the presiding bench, cleared her throat. She had her monocle and her clipboard and the particular set of her jaw that meant she was going to run this exactly by procedure and not permit the session to become a spectacle. "The Wizengamot is in session," she said. "Full chamber. The matter before us is the determination of guardianship and magical education provisions for Harry James Potter, aged 6, following the confirmed Fujimo Bond event of the 15th of August. Presiding jointly, Chief Warlock Dumbledore and myself." She looked at the chamber. "We will hear from the Ministry's Family Magical Welfare Office first, then from the applicant family, that being the Delacour family, represented by Advocate Beaumont, and then from interested parties who have been granted standing." She paused. "Lord Knott has been granted standing. The speaking order will follow the standard agenda. We will then hear from Chief Warlock Dumbledore, who has requested a special introduction. The chamber has consented to this." She adjusted her monocle. "We begin." The Family Magical Welfare Office presentation was delivered by a mild, careful woman named Cordelia Pruitt who had clearly read every document available and had the expression of someone who had also read the Morning Prophet and was trying not to let it affect her delivery of the facts, largely unsuccessfully. The facts were, Harry's weight, his living conditions as documented by Healer Marchbanks, the 12 days at La Maison de Flammes and the developmental assessment that Celeste had prepared and submitted through Advocate Beaumont, the bond certification from the Department of Mysteries, and a note from a Muggle primary school teacher named Mrs. Shields who had written, unprompted, on behalf of one of Harry's classmates' parents, that Harry Potter was the quietest and cleverest child she had taught in 30 years and she had often wondered about him going home. The chamber was very quiet during the last point. Advocate Beaumont's presentation was crisper and considerably more technical: legal precedent, covenant articles, the developmental assessment in detail, the formal certification of the Fujimo from a panel of 3 Department of Mysteries unspeakables who had apparently spent 2 days arguing about its parameters before reaching unanimous agreement. She was good, Harry thought. She talked fast and precisely and she understood which points needed emphasis and which ones could be stated and moved past. When she finished, she sat down and nodded fractionally at Harry, which was her version of that went well. Lord Knott stood up. He was tall, with the angular, maintained appearance of an old family that has been careful about everything for generations. He had light eyes that held the particular quality of someone who is always calculating, and he spoke with the smooth assurance of a man who has never been in a room where he didn't feel he belonged. "Chief Warlock, Madame Bones," he said, inclining his head to each in turn. "I speak today not in opposition to the Delacour family, who are respectable magical people of considerable lineage. He paused, and the pause was the kind that does work. I speak in concern for the British wizarding world's most significant magical national. Harry Potter is not simply a child. He is, as the prophecy documented in our own Department of Mysteries confirms, the pivot point of the coming resolution of the greatest dark threat of our age. He spoke for 12 minutes. He was good at it. Harry listened to all of it with the same level attention he'd given everything. Didn't say anything openly hostile, everything was framed as concern, as protection, as the reasonable desire of the British magical world to ensure that a child of such prophetic significance received his education and his formation in Britain, from British magical tradition, with British oversight. He said foreign influence twice without quite saying it was bad. He said ancient magical bond once with an inflection that implied he thought it was something that had happened to Harry rather than something that had found him. He said safeguarding 4 times. He sat down. The chamber murmured. Several other members spoke, shorter interventions, most of them either cautious support for Nott's position or cautious support for the Delacour arrangement, phrased with the careful hedging of people who had read the morning paper and weren't sure which way the room was going. The British wizarding world had, Harry was gathering, fairly strong feelings about him without actually knowing him, which was a strange thing to be the object of. Then Dumbledore stood. The chamber's quality of attention changed when Dumbledore stood. He had a presence that was different from authority, deeper than authority, because authority can be challenged and this couldn't, it was simply a fact of the room. He stood at the high position and looked down at Harry for a moment before he spoke. I have been Harry Potter's magical guardian in all but name since the night his parents were killed, he said. I arranged his placement. I designed the protections around him. I made those decisions with what I believed were good reasons, and I stand by some of them. He paused. I do not stand by all of them. The chamber was absolutely still. I have heard today from a ministry official, from a legal advocate, and from Lord Nott, all speaking about Harry's future. Dumbledore looked at the chamber. I would like the chamber to hear from Harry himself. He extended his hand toward Harry. Not literally, it was a gesture of presentation, of yielding the floor. I ask the chamber's permission, Dumbledore said, to allow Harry Potter to address this body directly. He is 6 years old. He is also, and I say this with the authority of one who has known many extraordinary people, one of the most clear-eyed individuals I have encountered in a long and varied life. He looked at Madame Bones. Amelia? Madame Bones looked at Harry. Then at the chamber. Several members were already nodding. She adjusted her monocle. The chair recognizes Harry Potter, she said. Harry stood up. He was not very tall. Standing in the center of the chamber, below the tiers of benches, he was very aware of how much stone was around him and above him and how many people were looking down. The visitor gallery above the main chamber had gone completely silent. He could feel the presence of the press up there, the specific attentiveness of people preparing to write. He looked at the chamber. Not at any one person. At the whole arc of it. My name is Harry Potter, he said. His voice was clear and didn't waver. I'm 6 years old. I'll be 7 in January. He paused, letting the simplicity of it sit. I found out about your world about 3 weeks ago, he said. Not all of it. But enough to understand why I'm standing here. He looked up at the benches. I know about the prophecy. I know about Voldemort. He heard the sound move through the chamber, not a gasp, exactly, but a collective intake at the name, and he waited for it to settle. I know that a lot of people in this room have been thinking about what I'm going to do and what I'm going to be, and who should have access to me while I become it. He put his hands in his pockets, which was not a deliberate choice, it was just what his hands did. I want to tell you 3 things, he said. And then I'll sit down. He looked at the chamber. At Nott's angular face, which had gone slightly careful. At the careful hedgers in the middle benches. At a woman with kind eyes on the left side who had said nothing all session but was leaning forward slightly. At Arthur Weasley, who was in the third row and had his elbows on his knees and was looking at Harry with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral. First, Harry said. I lived in a cupboard. Not as a metaphor. An actual cupboard under the stairs, for the first 5 years of my life, until my cousin needed a second bedroom. I'm telling you this because the people responsible for it thought they were keeping me safe, and the people who arranged it thought they were serving a greater purpose, and nobody was wrong in the way that only careless people are wrong. He paused. They were wrong in the way that happens when a person becomes a plan instead of a person. I am asking you not to make the same mistake. The chamber was very still. Second, Harry said. The bond is real. The Fujimo is real. I am not a foreign influence's victim. I am not a prize that the Delacour family has won. I am a boy who was claimed by 2 Veela sisters at the same moment because of something ancient and true, and in the 12 days since that happened I have eaten proper meals and slept in a bed with actual springs and learned more about magic than in 6 years of things happening around me that nobody explained. He looked at the chamber. Apollon Delacour asked me what my favorite food was on the first night. Nobody had ever asked me that before. He let the simplicity of that sit. That is the foreign influence I am apparently at risk from. Several people in the benches were looking at their hands. Third, Harry said. He pressed his hand briefly to his sternum, and the gesture was instinctive rather than performed. The prophecy says I have a power Voldemort doesn't know. I've thought about what that is. I believe it is this. He looked at the chamber steadily. I know what it feels like to belong to people who chose me. He never did. He can't learn it. That is a genuine magical principle. Love that protects is love that was offered freely and costs the person who gives it. He paused. I am not asking to be kept in France so I can hide from a prophecy. I am asking to be with the people who are teaching me what love that costs something actually feels like. Because when the time comes that the prophecy matters, that knowledge is the only thing that will matter. The chamber was completely silent. He looked at Nott. I'm not a national asset, Lord Nott. I'm not a symbol that British wizarding tradition owns. I'm a person. He looked at Nott steadily. And I know what you actually want when you talk about British oversight and proper formation. You want proximity to what I am and what I'll be. I want to say clearly, in front of everyone here and everyone in that gallery, that proximity is not available to you. Nott's expression went very controlled. I'm going back to France with the Delacours, Harry said, looking back at the chamber at large. I will come to Hogwarts when I'm 11, because it's the right school and my parents went there and Dumbledore is there and I want to learn in the magical tradition I was born into. But my home is La Maison de Flammes, and my family is the Delacours and Celeste Beaumont Delacour and the bond one carry, and I'm asking you to recognize that officially. He paused. Please. He sat down. The silence held for a moment. Then it broke, not into chaos, but into the specific sound of a deliberative body processing something it hadn't prepared for, a wave of consultation and whisper that moved through the benches from the near side to the far, and in the gallery there was movement and the scratching of quills and the particular intensity of journalists who know they are witnessing something they will be citing for years. Madame Bones adjusted her monocle twice. Arthur Weasley was looking at the ceiling with his jaw set in the way of a man preventing himself from doing something louder. Dumbledore had sat back down at the apex of the chamber, and he was looking at Harry with those complicated blue eyes, and the expression underneath the management was the one that had been there since the corridor under the stadium, pure, uncomplicated pain, and something else now, something that looked, from where Harry was sitting, very much like a father proud of a child he didn't raise. Lord Nott stood up. If the chamber will permit a response to, sit down, Theodore, said the woman with kind eyes, from the left benches, without raising her voice. Nott looked at her. Sit down. She was small and silver-haired, not Celeste's formidable silver but a softer one, and she had the look of someone who had been in this chamber for 30 years and had earned the right to say sit down in that particular tone. The child has spoken. We are here to determine his welfare. Not to debate his assessment of your motivations, which is accurate and therefore uncomfortable. She looked at the chamber. I propose we move to the determination. Not sat down. Madame Bones looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore gave the smallest nod. The chamber will move to determination, Madame Bones said. The question before us is threefold. First, does the Fujimo bond constitute grounds for provisional guardianship under the Veela Covenant of 1847? Second, does the welfare assessment support the proposed placement with the Delacour family of Provence? Third, what oversight conditions, if any, should attach to this placement? She looked at the chamber. All in favor of the bond constituting grounds under the 1847 covenant? Hands went up. Harry counted quickly, it was not a close vote. 61 of 83. Opposed? 11, including Nott and several of the careful hedgers who had apparently decided. Abstentions? 11. The remaining careful hedgers, buying time. The first question is resolved in the affirmative, Madame Bones said, writing on her clipboard. Second question, welfare assessment supporting placement with the Delacour family. A longer pause before the hands. But they went up, more this time, Harry thought, or at least held up with more certainty. 67. Opposed? 7. Third question, oversight conditions. Madame Bones looked at Dumbledore. Chief Warlock Dumbledore has prepared a draft proposal. Dumbledore stood. The proposal is as follows. Harry Potter will reside primarily with the Delacour family at La Maison de Flammes, Provence. He will attend Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry from the age of 11 as intended, with the school year constituting British primary residence and summers constituting French primary residence. He will be accessible to myself and to ministry welfare checks on a quarterly basis, the checks to be conducted by the Family Magical Welfare Office and not by any party with political interest in the outcome. He paused. He will not be required to attend ministry functions or public events or to represent the British wizarding world in any capacity without his express consent and, until the age of 17, the consent of his guardians. He looked at the chamber. Any engagement with persons seeking proximity to him on the basis of his prophetic status requires documented consent from both Harry and his guardians. This includes social engagement, professional correspondence, and, he looked directly at Nott. Invitations to wizarding events of any kind. Nott's face was very still. The oversight, Dumbledore continued, is for Harry's protection. Not for the convenience of interested parties. The vote on the oversight conditions was 68 in favor. Nott's camp didn't bother voting against, they were doing the calculation, and the calculation was clear. The chamber finds in favor, Madame Bones said. She looked at Harry. Mr. Potter. The Wizengamot formally recognizes your placement with the Delacour family under the provisions of the Veela Covenant of 1847 and the oversight conditions as specified. You are not a ward of the British Ministry. You are not a ward of the Dursley family. You are, under British magical law, under the guardianship of Apollon Delacour, with all rights, protections, and provisions thereof. She set her clipboard down, which was a subtle but distinct departure from her professional manner. I hope, she said, quietly, so that only the front benches and Harry could hear, that you get what you asked for, Harry. All of it. Harry looked at her. Thank you, Madame Bones. He stood up from the chair. Behind him, in the visitors' section below the gallery, he could hear Apollon and the movement that meant she was standing. He could feel the brand, Fleur's warmth, fierce and present, and Gabrielle's steadier warmth underneath it, and both of them had been in the visitors' section throughout the session, and both of them were there now, and the warmth was larger than usual, as though the fire had expanded to mark the moment. He walked back toward the visitors' section. He walked through the chamber with his head up and his hands out of his pockets and his feet making small, clear sounds on the old stone floor, and the chamber watched him go, and in the gallery above the quills were moving frantically, and Lord Knot was speaking in a low voice to the person beside him, and Dumbledore was watching from the high seat with those blue eyes. Arthur Weasley stood up in the third bench as Harry passed below him and said, clearly, without caring who heard, "Well done, lad." Harry looked up at him. Something cracked through the professional neutrality he'd been carrying all morning, something warm and genuine that he hadn't planned on showing. He smiled. Not the small, surprised smile from the inn, not the careful smile he managed when he needed to. A real one, wide and uncomplicated. "Thanks, Mr. Weasley," he said. Arthur's own face broke into something unreserved and warm. He sat back down and immediately turned to the person beside him and started talking rapidly and quietly, which Harry suspected meant he was already composing his letter home to Molly. Harry kept walking. The visitors' section was beyond a low partition at the base of the chamber, and Apollon was there, and Jacques was there with his hand on her shoulder, and Celeste was there with her walking stick and her sharp eyes and her face showing something he had not yet seen on it, uncomplicated relief. Advocate Beaumont was there, writing rapidly on her parchment with the satisfied energy of someone filing a historic win. Fleur was there. And Gabrielle was there, standing at the front of the section with her hands clasped in front of her and Lapin tucked under her arm, and when Harry came through the partition she crossed to him in 3 steps and put her arms around him. He went still for a moment, the instinctive stillness of someone who has not been held very often. Then he put his arms around her back and felt the warmth of the bond and the warmth of the small, certain person in front of him, and let it be what it was. Fleur's hand came to his shoulder. Not holding, just there, warm and present. Her thumb pressed once, briefly. Apollon's voice was very controlled. "Harry." He looked up at her over Gabrielle's head. "We are going home," she said. He'd heard the word before. He'd used the word before. But it had always meant privet drive, the absence of warmth, the careful 3 steps behind, the tally of what was insufficient. He said the word now and it landed somewhere entirely different. "Yes," he said. "Let's go home." Behind them, in the chamber, the session was being formally closed. The sound of it, the wooden gavel, the procedural language, the rising noise of 83 people resuming normal movement, faded as they moved through the corridor toward the ministry atrium, and then faded further as they reached the floor points, and then disappeared entirely as the green flame closed around them. The last thing Harry saw before the fire took them was Dumbledore, standing at the chamber entrance, watching them leave. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't sad, exactly. He looked like a man watching something go in the right direction at some cost to himself, and being glad about the direction even so. Harry met his eyes for 1 second. He gave Dumbledore a small nod. Dumbledore inclined his head in return. Then the fire took them, and Britain was behind them, and Provence was ahead. Chapter 6, The New Shape of Things. The lavender was still in flower when they got back. Harry stood at the gate of La Maison de Flammes in the late afternoon and the air smelled like time and heat and the particular quality of a place that has been waiting for you, and the wisteria on the south wall had apparently taken advantage of their absence to advance another 18 inches up the stonework, which Jacques noted with resigned admiration on his way through the gate. Cendrillon was sitting on the gatepost. She looked at Harry with the frank, assessing attention of a cat that makes decisions and sticks to them, and then stepped from the gatepost to his shoulder with the practiced ease of something that had decided this was acceptable. Harry stood very still, which was the correct response, and after a moment Cendrillon settled against his neck with a proprietary quality that suggested she had made her judgment and it was final. "She never does that," Gabrielle said, looking at this development with wide eyes. "She did it to me once," Jacques said. "The first week I came to this house to visit your mother. I thought it meant something significant." "Did it?" Harry asked. "She bit me 2 days later," Jacques said. "So the evidence is mixed." Cendrillon purred. They went inside, and the house received them with the warm, slightly chaotic embrace of a place that has people in it who love it, the garlic and tomato smell still somehow present in the kitchen walls, the books that had been on the stairs precisely where they'd been left, a cat toy in the center of the living room floor that nobody had moved, and the amber afternoon light coming through the western windows in long dusty columns. Harry stood in the kitchen doorway and felt the accumulated weight of the day leave his body in one long exhale. He hadn't performed today. He hadn't managed anything. He'd simply said true things clearly, and the true things had been enough. He was not used to true things being enough. He was filing this information away for future use. "Sit," Apollon said, pointing at the kitchen table with the authority of a woman returning to her own domain. "All of you. I am making dinner." "I can help," Harry said. "You testified before the full Wizengamot today. Sit down." "I'd like to help," he said, and there was something in the way he said it, not compulsive, not the automatic helpfulness of a child who has learned that usefulness is safety, that was different. He said it the way Jacques said he enjoyed company. Because it was true. Apollon looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded and pointed at the vegetables. He helped. Celeste installed herself at the kitchen table with her evening tea and watched them with those sharp eyes that were now, Harry had learned, a form of affection rather than assessment. She had stopped assessing him several days ago. He'd noticed the shift in how she looked at him and had felt something about it that he was still working out the edges of. Fleur appeared in the kitchen doorway with her hair loose and the particular expression she wore when she'd been thinking about something for a long time and had arrived at a conclusion. She sat down across from Celeste and said, "Tell me about the first Fujimo. The documented one." Celeste set her tea down. "Why now?" "Because it's been resolved. The hearing is done. Now I want to understand what we actually are." She paused. "What the three of us are." Celeste looked at her for a moment. Then at Harry, who was cutting courgettes with more competence than most 11-year-olds. Then at Gabrielle, who had come to sit beside Fleur and was watching Celeste with the attentive patience of someone who already knows the answer and is interested in the version that will be told. "The first confirmed Fujimo," Celeste said, "was in 1203. Southern France, as it happens. A carrier named Etienne, a young man, 17, a village healer's apprentice. Two sisters of the LeBlanc line, both full Veela, which is rarer than part Veela and more volatile." She turned her cup in its saucer. "The bond ignited during a market. Half the market stalls caught fire. 3 people required healing. What happened to them?" Harry asked, without stopping his cutting. "Etienne became one of the most powerful magical healers of the 13th century. The sisters were his partners in every sense, not romantically, not initially at any rate, but in work, in magic, in the architecture of what they built together. The bond gave him a capacity that no single healer training could account for." She paused. "He lived to 97, which was extraordinary for the time. The sisters lived longer. And the fire they worked with," Harry said. "Was it healing?" Celeste looked at him with the expression that had replaced assessment, that settled, satisfied look. "The magic that comes from the Fujimo is directional," she said. "It takes its shape from the carrier's nature. Etienne was a healer, so the power that developed through the bond was healing in character, not just medical. He could mend things that were broken in ways that had nothing to do with bodies." "And me?" Harry said. "What do you think?" Celeste said. Harry finished the courgettes and moved to the tomatoes. He thought about it with the same honesty he applied to Celeste's garden lessons, no performance, just looking at what was actually there. "It's protective," he said. "My magic. When things have happened uncontrolled, it's always been when someone was threatening me. And the prophecy is about protection, not attack, not power for its own sake. Protection." He turned a tomato over in his hands. "The shield between me and Voldemort's curse. My mother's protection. It's all the same family of thing." Yes, Celeste said simply. So the bond is amplifying something that was already protective in nature. The fire takes its shape from the carrier's nature, Celeste said again. In your case, the nature is, she tilted her head. You are someone who protects. Not because you were told to. Not because someone required it of you. Because it is the shape of how your magic moves. Harry looked at the tomato. He thought about standing in front of Gabrielle in that first corridor. He hadn't done it consciously, but he'd been aware of the movement, of putting himself between her and the crowd noise and the adult chaos. He thought about asking if the brand hurt Fleur before he thought about asking what it was. Is that why the prophecy is mine? He said. Not quite a question. The prophecy belongs to you because you are the only person whose nature is configured to make Voldemort's destruction non-destructive, Celeste said. Anyone else who attempted it would burn. You will not burn. Because what you carry is not the capacity to destroy but the capacity to make destruction unnecessary. The kitchen was quiet except for the sounds of Apollon cooking and Harry's knife on the board. Gabrielle said, in careful English, looking at the table, he protects the fire. And the fire protects him. Everyone looked at her. She looked up, apparently surprised by the silence. It is simple, she said, with the matter-of-fact confidence of a 4-year-old who has been certain about this for longer than she has been able to articulate it. Fleur looked at her sister. Then at Harry. Then at the ceiling, with the expression of someone making peace with something. She has always been like this, Fleur said, to no one in particular. I know, Harry said. I think it's one of her best qualities. Gabrielle smiled her small, satisfied smile and said nothing further. After dinner, which was the good kind, the kind that takes time to make and takes time to eat and produces conversation that wanders through topics without urgency, Harry went up to his room. It was his room now. Not just a room he was occupying. 3 days into the Provence stay, Apollon had knocked on his door in the evening and handed him a small, flat parcel, and inside it had been 3 things, a key on a plain silver ring, a jar of the lavender from the garden, and a folded note in Apollon's handwriting that said, in English, "This room is yours. Not borrowed. Not conditional. Yours." He had folded the note and put it in the pocket of his jeans and worn it there for 2 days until Apollon noticed the way he kept his hand over that pocket and had said nothing about it, which was one of her better qualities. The room had accumulated things in 3 weeks. Books from Dumbledore and from Fleur, who kept handing him things with the tone of someone who has decided you need to read this without making it a request. A small drawing that Gabrielle had made and pushed under his door one morning, a drawing of 3 people and a house and a sun that was gold and white, clearly the brand, rendered in crayon with 4-year-old precision. Lapin, who had moved permanently to Harry's room because Gabrielle had decided he lived there now, a decision she had communicated by placing him on Harry's pillow and leaving without explanation. And on the windowsill, the lavender from Apollon's note, in its jar, the smell of it present in the room constantly. Harry sat on the bed and looked at the view, the hills going dark, the first stars, the last orange line of the horizon. Senderlin had followed him upstairs and was on the desk chair doing the liquid thing. He pressed his hand to his sternum. Warm. Both of them. Fleur's fire, active, present, never quite still, and Gabrielle's steadier warmth, which had a quality like banked coals, not less hot than Fleur's, just more patient about it. He sat with it for a while. There was a knock at his door, not Gabrielle's tiny knock and not Apollon's careful knock but Fleur's, which was brisk and confident and left just enough space between the knock and the door opening to be technically polite. "Can I come in?" "You're already coming in," he said. Fleur came in. She was in her pajamas, less elegant than her daytime presentation, which humanized her in a way he found he liked, and carrying 2 mugs. She held one out. He took it. Hot chocolate. He looked at it, then at her. "Jacques made it," she said, sitting cross-legged on the end of his bed with her own mug. "He makes it when someone has done something hard. It is a house tradition." She paused. He made it the night Gabrielle said her first full sentence in French. He made it the night I passed my first-year assessments. He makes it for the significant moments. Harry looked at the hot chocolate. It was a proper one, dark, slightly bitter, with the smell of good chocolate and something underneath it that was warm and spiced. He drank some and it was the best thing he'd had today, which was an achievement given the dinner. "You were extraordinary today," Fleur said. "You're not supposed to say things like that," he said. "You'll inflate my ego." "Your ego is fine," she said. "It is exactly the right size." She looked at her mug. "What you said about Voldemort. About love. I have been thinking about it all evening. And I think you're right. And I think it is also what happened to us. The bond." She was choosing words with care, which was unusual for Fleur, whose instinct was speed. He understood power as domination. Taking, not giving. The bond is, it is the opposite architecture. It gives. It grows by giving. She looked up at him. "You understood that before I did. And I am 5 years older than you." "You understood it too," Harry said. "You just had more language to argue with yourself about it." Fleur made the exasperated sound. But her mouth was curving. "What will school be like?" Harry asked. "When you go back." The question was practical but it had weight under it, and Fleur heard the weight. September was 3 weeks away. Fleur was going back to Beauxbatons. Beauxbatons was in France, but not Provence. It was a residential school, which meant she would be there during term and home for holidays, which was the same as Hogwarts would eventually be for Harry. "It will be fine," Fleur said, and the quickness of it told him she had been thinking about this already. "The bond doesn't, you know, it doesn't weaken with distance." Celeste explained it. "I know. And you will still be here. With Grandmere and Maman and Papa and Gabrielle." She paused. "Who will, in your absence, undoubtedly teach you more about beetles and negotiate further territorial arrangements with the cat." Harry smiled. "She got the whole sunny patch this morning. Senderlin's been demoted to the shade." "A tragedy," Fleur said, with great seriousness. Senderlin opened one eye from the desk chair, registered that she was being discussed, and closed it again with the dignity of someone above responding to commentary. Fleur looked at her mug. "When I come back at Christmas," she said, "you will be entirely different. Children grow very fast at this age." "You'll be different too," Harry said. "Yes. But you will be," she paused. "The magic you have. What Celeste is teaching you. By Christmas you will be," she searched for the word. "Formidable. Is that a compliment? From me?" "Yes." She met his eyes and the expression was the one she only used when she'd stopped deciding how much of herself to show. "It is the highest one." Harry looked at his hot chocolate. "Fleur." "Yes. Thank you. For today. For sitting in that chamber the whole time and not," he stopped. "I could feel you. The whole time. Like a hand on my shoulder. Not physically. But there." Fleur was quiet. "And Gabrielle," he said. Her fire was different. It was the warm kind. The kind that tells you you're not alone. He looked up. "It made a difference. I don't know if I would have said all of it without knowing you were both there." Fleur looked at him for a long moment. Her expression went through 3 versions and arrived at the one that was just true. "That is what the bond is for," she said. "Not power. Not prophecy." She paused. "You are never alone. That is the whole of it." Harry nodded. She drank her hot chocolate and he drank his and the night was very quiet, just the hills and the stars and the faint sound of the lavender moving in the evening breeze that came up from the south after dark, and neither of them said anything else for a while because nothing else needed saying. She left when the mugs were empty, taking both with the same efficient competence she brought to everything, and paused in the doorway on her way out. Harry. Yes. You said it today. In the chamber. You called us your family. He didn't answer immediately. Was that? She stopped. Did you mean it? He looked at her. At the doorway, the amber light from the corridor behind her, the silver blonde hair and the cheekbones and the expression that was trying hard to be neutral and not quite managing it. Yes, he said. I meant it. Fleur made the sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, except this time it tipped slightly more toward one of them. Good night, she said. Good night. She pulled the door closed. Harry lay back on his bed and looked at the ceiling. The brand was warm below his sternum. He put his hand over it and felt both of them, Fleur's fire, settling now as she moved toward sleep, and Gabrielle's steady cold warmth, which was the same at all hours because Gabrielle, he had come to understand, simply was what she was at all times without negotiation. He thought about the hearing. About the chamber and the chair and the sound of his own voice saying true things in a room full of people who needed to hear them. He thought about Lord Knott's controlled expression and Madame Bones's quiet words and Arthur Weasley's well done, lad, and the way Dumbledore had watched him leave. He thought about the letter he would write to Dumbledore tomorrow. Not a strategic letter, just a letter. A proper one, the kind that doesn't manage anything but simply talks to another person. He thought Dumbledore deserved that, imperfectly and with effort. He thought that was something worth trying. He thought about Voldemort, briefly, because it was honest to think about it, the shape of what was coming, the architecture of the prophecy, the fact that the whole structure of his life had been arranged around a threat that was not yet arrived. He looked at it calmly. He had the fire below his sternum and the family in the house around him and the hills outside his window, and 5 years before he had to think about it seriously. 5 years was a long time. He had things to learn. Sleep was beginning at the edges of his thinking, the warm, heavy kind that meant the day had been genuinely spent, and he let it come without resisting it. Cinderlin had moved from the desk chair to the foot of the bed at some point, and the small warm weight of her was there, and Lapin was on the pillow, and the lavender was in the jar on the windowsill. He was asleep before the last of the stars fully came out. In the morning, Celeste arrived in the garden at 7 with her tea and her walking stick and found Harry already there, cross-legged on the warm stone, eyes closed, the tidal rhythm visible in the slight movement of his hands, in and out, the magic cycling through him with the ease of a thing that has been practiced until it no longer requires thought. She looked at him. The brand was not visible, it had settled below the surface within the first day, living now in the feel of things rather than the look, but she had been watching magic for 70 years and she could see the shape of it around him. Not an aura, exactly. Something more architectural than that. The structure of a fire that has found its form. She sat in her stone chair and drank her tea and waited. After a while, Harry opened his eyes. The light is different today, he said. Yes, she said. It often changes after a significant event. Magic is responsive. It registers things. He looked at the hills. The morning light on them was gold and slightly red, the angle of late August, the season turning at its edges. Are you going back to Paris soon? Not yet, Celeste said. There are more things to teach you. What things? The things that come after the foundation. She turned her cup. You have the tidal quality. You have direction and control at the basic level. You have the bond in your hands, you know how to feel it, how to work with it. She looked at him. Now we go deeper. Deeper into what? Into what the fire actually is, she said. Not its behavior. Its nature. She paused. There is a difference between understanding how a river flows and understanding that water always seeks the lowest point. One is technique. The other is principle. She tilted her head. You need both. Harry nodded. When do we start? We started 6 minutes ago when you sat down, Celeste said. You simply didn't need me yet. The corner of his mouth moved. From inside the house came the sound of Gabrielle's voice, and then Apollin's, and then the sounds of breakfast being made, Jacques' particular rhythm in the kitchen, the coffee, the bread, the familiar domestic architecture of a morning in the house on the hill. Fleur would be down in 20 minutes, slightly rushed, with a book under her arm and her hair half done and the clear-eyed morning focus she had before the social self switched on. Harry listened to the house. Celeste, he said. Yes. The prophecy says he'll mark me as his equal. He said it without drama. He already did. The scar. He paused. But Dumbledore said that's one interpretation. That I might have more latitude in how it plays out than the prophecy implies. Celeste looked at him. What I'm wondering, Harry said, is whether defeating him has to mean destroying him. Or whether it can mean making him irrelevant. Making the thing he built collapse because the foundation doesn't work anymore. Celeste was quiet for a long time. That, she said finally, is a question that has not been asked before in all the scholarship on this prophecy. Is it a wrong question? No, she said. It is the right question. It is the question that changes everything. She looked at him steadily. Why do you think destroying him might not be necessary? Because his power base is fear, Harry said. And loyalty through fear. And the idea that blood determines worth. He turned a stone over in his hand, he'd been doing it absently, the same way he held things when he was thinking. Those things don't survive contact with their opposite. They collapse when enough people stop believing in them. Voldemort himself is almost secondary to that, he's the focal point but the system is the problem. And the system collapses when people know what the alternative looks like, Harry said. When they've seen it. When someone like me, who should be either dead or afraid, is neither. He set the stone down. Today was part of that, I think. Standing in that chamber and saying true things clearly. Not performing. Not being the symbol. Just being present. He looked at Celeste. Is that naive? No, Celeste said. It is strategic in a way that most strategists are too frightened to be. She looked at him. It is also simply who you are, which is why it works. Performed courage is detectable. Yours is not performed. I'm not particularly courageous, Harry said. I'm just not as afraid as I could be. Those are the same thing, Celeste said. He thought about this. Is not being afraid something I can teach? When I'm older. When I have people around me who need to know how. Celeste looked at him with those sharp dark eyes, and the expression on her face was one he'd seen only once before, in the garden on the first morning, when she'd said I think you will do. It was satisfaction and something more than that. Something that looked, in an elderly French Veela great-grandmother who had seen 7 political administrations and 3 wars and who expressed affection through rigorous instruction, remarkably like wonder. Not directly, she said. You cannot teach the absence of fear. But you can teach people to stand in the presence of it. To continue anyway. She paused. And yes. You can teach that. You have already begun. He hadn't begun yet. He was 6, nearly 7, in a garden in Provence with the lavender silver with dew and the morning coming up over the hills. But she said it as a fact of the future, and he received it the same way. Okay, he said. 3 weeks later, Fleur left for Beaux-Batons. The morning she left was clear and cool, September having arrived with its particular quality of light, shorter, more golden, the season beginning its argument with summer. She came downstairs with her trunk packed and her Beaux-Batons robes folded on top and the expression of someone who has made their peace with something but is not required to be cheerful about it. She had hugged Gabrielle first. Gabrielle had accepted this with the gravity of a small general receiving intelligence. Jacques had hugged her and whispered something in her ear that made her close her eyes briefly and then straighten up. Apollon had held her face in both hands and said something too quiet for Harry to hear, and Fleur had nodded. Celeste had simply looked at her and said, "Write to me if the dueling curriculum is still as outdated as it was in my day," and Fleur had laughed before she'd meant to. Then she came to Harry. He was standing near the gate with Cinderlin on his shoulder, which was the cat's current preference and a fact she enforced by arriving each morning and stepping from whatever surface was available directly onto him. Fleur looked at him. He looked at her. The brand was warm, very warm, the way it was when emotion pressed against the edges of it. "You will practice," she said. "Every morning," he said. "You will write to me when something significant happens." "And when something insignificant happens," he said. "Celeste says the small things matter." "They do." Fleur paused. "The next time I see you, it will be Christmas." 14 weeks, Harry said. She blinked. "You counted?" "I counted." The expression moved through her face, fierce and helpless, and something that was resolved now, no longer something she was deciding how much of to show. She reached out and put her hand against his face, briefly, palm to cheek, a gesture that was simple and direct and said everything the bond had been saying for 5 weeks without the language of words. He put his hand over hers. Just for a moment. Then she stepped back. 14 weeks, she said. "Goes fast," he said. "It absolutely does not," she said, "and you know it, and you are saying it to be kind." She tilted her chin up. "Which is one of your better qualities." She picked up her trunk. Apollon walked her to the flue point, and the green fire closed around her, and she was gone. Harry stood at the gate with the cat on his shoulder and felt the warmth of the bond, still there, unchanged by distance, the same fire at the same temperature. Not gone. Just, pointed in a new direction, the way a compass points regardless of where you're standing. Gabrielle appeared beside him, took his hand, and looked at the sky. "She'll be okay," Harry said. "I know," Gabrielle said. "I'm not worried about her." She paused, in the considering way she had. "I'm thinking about the beetles." Harry looked down at her. "What about them?" "There is a new one," she said. "By the south wall. I have been trying to decide if it is more important than the one from August." She looked up at him with those serious gray eyes. "I think you should decide. You are better at importance." He was 6 years old and he had a prophecy about his name in the Department of Mysteries and a dark wizard gathering somewhere in the margins of the world and a scar on his forehead that an entire magical nation had been organizing its anxiety around for 5 years. He looked down at Gabrielle Delacour, 4 years old, silver-haired, certain, holding his hand in the September morning. "Okay," he said. "Show me the beetle." They went to find it. Behind them, through the kitchen window, Jacques was making bread. Apollon had appeared in the garden with her tea and the Morning Post and was reading with the focused calm of a woman who has won a significant battle and is already thinking about the next thing, because that is the shape of how she moves. Cinderlin slipped off Harry's shoulder as he crouched to look at Gabrielle's beetle, found a stone in the sun, and became a liquid. The beetle was, objectively, not more important than the August one. Harry looked at it for a long time, crouched beside Gabrielle in the warm grass, and then said, with great seriousness, "I think it's equally important." Gabrielle considered this. A co-importance. Exactly. She nodded with the gravity of a treaty being ratified. "Good," she said. "That is fair." The hills were gold and the lavender was silver and the wisteria was 18 inches further up the south wall, and the fire was warm below his sternum, and Fleur was 14 weeks away, and Voldemort was years away, and the world was the new shape it had become, not without difficulty, not without the things that were coming, but built on a foundation that had not existed 4 weeks ago. Harry Potter stood up from the grass and looked at the house on the hill with its pale stone and its riotous garden and its too ambitious wisteria, and he knew, not dramatically, not in the way of a story arriving at its point, but in the simple, tidal way of something that has settled, this was home. The fire agreed.